We'll move into the start of the meeting, and we have a quorum. So, could I remind members and those in the public gallery to switch off mobile phones, as they may interfere with the sound recording system, and the meeting will be on camera. Reminding members also of their obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interests in relation to today's business. Reminding members to ensure that the volume on all tablet devices is off, and the quickest way to do that is to press function on F8. We have one apology at the moment from Leslie Cree, so I'm assuming that others who haven't
heard anything else.
Okay.
Wasn't great last night.
We have the draft minutes of the meeting of the 21st of May, which are at page 5. And can I seek members' agreement that these minutes are an accurate record of the meetings? Okay, thank you. And at this point, just to mention that this is the last committee meeting for James Harley, who has been with us for quite some time now.
Let's all look at him.
The man of the bow ties.
He's not wearing one today.
Not today.
Sorry?
He's not wearing one today.
No, I know that.
He's conforming.
You want to know what the dress code is for he works in America? It's fascinating. So, thank you for your contribution and your work over that time, James, and we hope you've enjoyed and learned quite a bit here in Northern Ireland. I'm sure you have. Wish you well. Travel widely.
Travel widely, yeah.
Good. Brings us then to the inquiry into issues about emergency exiting plans, including their impact on stadium capacity for the redeveloped Casement Park. And we're going to receive a briefing this morning from the Senior Responsible Officer in DCAL, the SRO. You have a memo which is at page 10. And could I welcome to the meeting the following officials? We have Mrs. Cynthia Smith, the Deputy Secretary in DCAL, and Dr. Dennis McMahon, the Permanent Secretary in DCAL. Could I remind members and also witnesses of their obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interests in relation to today's business, and just to say that as the Minister of DCAL at the time of the stadium redevelopment programme being agreed, I was in DCAL at that time.
Sure, I'm still a member of the
And Oliver, still a member.
Okay, thank you. Thank you indeed for coming this morning to the committee, and if you would like to make an opening statement, that would be appreciated.
Yes, okay. Good morning, and thank you very much, Chair, for inviting me to attend the committee today. And I welcome the opportunity for further discussion on the important issues raised. And just to start up front with, I have no relevant financial or other interests to declare, Chair. Evidence provided recently to the committee raised safety concerns about the proposed design of the new Casement Park Stadium. I want to affirm to the committee the programme for government commitment for delivering Casement Park. That commitment to the regional stadia programme has already been delivered for the Kingspan Stadium and for Ulster Rugby, and construction work on Windsor Park for the IFA is well underway. That leaves Casement Park, where there's a real opportunity to create a stadium that will make a positive difference to the lives of people in West Belfast and provide economic, social and cultural benefits for everyone. As the Minister has said, this will mean getting the balance right in terms of both the size of the stadium and how it is used. I also want to make absolutely clear the Department's commitment to delivering the new stadium in compliance with safety requirements. As with the Kingspan Stadium, the redeveloped stadia at Casement Park and at Windsor Park will not open without valid and compliant safety certificates. I know the committee will understand that we don't wish to prejudice the independent investigation which the Minister initiated and which is ongoing into the very serious concerns raised by the Chair of the Safety Technical Group. This in turn means that I am not able to respond to some of the specific questions about the concerns people may have while the process is ongoing. It's important.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
I think I know the point, because several members have picked up on that, and we'll come back to that at the end of what
Well, I just want
yeah,
to
yes.
put on there, I want to raise a point of order on the matter.
there are several heads were shaking at that point. If you'd proceed, Cynthia,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you. It's important not to preempt that process and also to protect both the person raising the issues and others involved. I would also want to add that I welcome anyone coming forward in good faith to raise issues when they feel they have not been properly addressed. I look forward to working with all key stakeholders when the actions initiated by the Minister have been completed and guided by the outcomes of the investigation and technically focused review to provide the necessary assurances as the GAA moves to initiate a new consultation process for its planning application. So it's worth stressing again that the actions initiated by the Minister involve two distinct areas of work. The project assessment review on the Stadia programme, which is a bespoke technically focused review, and the investigation in line with whistleblowing procedures, which will focus on the concerns and grievances raised at the CAL committee hearing, including allegations of bullying. We must be careful not to confuse the two. It's my job as SRO for the programme to ensure that it meets the objectives and delivers the projected benefits. In addition, each of the three projects has an SRO, a Senior Responsible Officer, with clearly defined responsibilities agreed with the respective governing body. These include, in respect of Casement Park, and as agreed with the GAA, overseeing the delivery of Casement Park on time and to budget, ensuring all high-level risks are mitigated and managed, and providing written confirmation of risks would need to be escalated to DCAL. We need to ensure that statutory requirements are met in order to deliver a compliant programme. A key element of this role includes putting appropriate governance arrangements in place. These have been set out in detail in the Department's letter of 12th of May 2015 to the Committee Chair, setting out the Managing Successful Programmes methodology to deliver the regional Stadia programme. The Stadia programme has several key mechanisms established to ensure compliance and to escalate issues to me as SRO, the Accounting Officer and the Minister. These include the Sponsorship Board chaired by the Minister, with representation from the three governing bodies and attendance by the Senior Responsible Officers and/or investment decision makers, Programme Director, Director of Sport and SNI representative. And the Programme Board, including myself as Chair, Stadium Programme Director, the Director of Corporate Services, the Director of Sport and Principal Information Officer. And I want to make it clear that this is in addition to the structures which exist at individual project level. For example, a project board, a project steering group, a senior responsible officer and an investment decision maker, all for the purposes of ensuring compliance at that level. Under the funding agreement, the contractor is required to meet all statutory obligations. This is the key contractual control mechanism to ensure that programme funding supports compliant projects. DCAL set up the programme on the basis of best practice advice from the Central Procurement Division of the Department of Finance and Personnel and other relevant bodies. I think it's important to take a few moments to set out the development process, a process which is still ongoing. There are two key stages in any capital development process, namely design and build. In the design phase, the project design team develops plans and associate documentation. In design and build contracts, the design team works with the contractor to ensure that what is being proposed is practical and affordable in terms of the available budget. These plans are developed through a series of iterations, but it's only when the plans are signed off that we move to the build stage. Only compliant plans can be signed off. Build is taken forward by the contractor teams, working to the plans, and again ensuring statutory compliance along the way. For example, in terms of ensuring that appropriate building control certificates are in place. One key aspect of the role of the Project Senior Responsible Officer and the Programme Senior Responsible Officer is to sign off at key points in the process. While there are a range of points which require sign-off, there are two key stages which are worth highlighting here. Firstly, the approval to proceed to design. This is in effect agreeing to sign off the contract with the design team, or in the case of design and build contracts, the design contractor team. This decision is supported by the approval of a business case. Importantly, the design and build contract which is signed with the contractor specifies that statutory obligations need to be addressed as follows. The services the contractor is to provide during the pre-construction period, which are included within the pre-construction period services fee, are liaison with statutory authorities, licensing, other approving and advisory bodies, and attaining statutory and advisory bodies' sign-off. Secondly, approval to proceed to build. This is where the design has been completed. It is assessed as meeting all of the requirements, including, of course, statutory obligations. It may be necessary to agree a revised business case at this point, for example, if costs have increased significantly. So it's really important to understand that at this stage in the process, we have only issued one of these approvals, namely the approval to design. We have not issued the approval to build, which would be achieved through a signed-off construction. The trigger to proceed from design phase to the actual construction phase is the release of the construction notice. The construction notice has not yet been issued. This is the point only at which it is deemed appropriate to proceed to construction. This is issued by the project manager. The building contract we developed specifically has the requirement placed on the contractor to attain statutory approvals and advisory bodies' sign-off. The Safety Technical Group, which we asked to be established, is a key advisory body, and this gate has yet to be reached. Work has commenced on the design to address the emergency exiting issue, but has not yet been concluded. The Department has put in place grant management processes and procedures through the funding agreement and various contracts, all of which include various gates and check stages. On Casement Park, the step-through and approval process included approval of the outline business case and the business plan, approval of the ICT, the design team, obtaining planning permission, approving the final business case, developing and executing the funding agreement and a Gateway 3 investment decision review, and only then appointing the contractor. Members should note separate statutory processes of planning and safety certification that has previously been noted to the committee. I also want there to be no doubt about the developmental nature of the programme. The development process is ongoing as we speak. Also, at this development development process continues, not all aspects of work will be completed at the same time. Finally, I want to make it really clear to the committee that no decision has been taken or recommended to build, and no construction notice has been signed off. It's absolutely clear that capital funding could only be provided to build the stadium when all statutory processes have been satisfied. Building work may only proceed when the construction notice has been issued. That has not taken place, and nor will it until all statutory processes have satisfied their obligations. In other words, no approval will be given to proceed to the next stage, i.e. construction, until key requirements have been met. Moving forward, I will be guided by the conclusions and recommendations of the Independent Project Assessment Review by independent experts from the Major Projects Authority, which I have commissioned through the Central Procurement Directorate of the Department of Finance and Personnel as the Centre of Procurement Excellence. This will address the capacity issue of the safety certificate for the stadium. The Project Assessment Review commissioned by the Minister will come to a view which we have assured the committee we will share with them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Could I take a couple of points here? First of all, technically within committees we don't have points of order, but there was around the room from a number of members a concern that was fairly evident when the comments were made in regarding to not being able to address certain things or not preempting or prejudicing whatever other work is ongoing. I think the view would be, I assume it's the view of the majority of the committee at least, that the role of the committee being to scrutinise the work of the department. If the department itself is doing something internally, that should not constrain what we ask or what we do. And I think that it would be important that it's acknowledged that questions that are asked should be answered, and that we're not constrained in any way in pursuing this. It's a matter of public importance. We're talking about substantial amounts of money. We're talking about a public investment of tens of millions of pounds. We're talking about the health and safety and well-being of people who use the ground, and therefore the inquiry that we're carrying out needs to be followed through without any obstruction or anything that would in any way constrain us. Okay.
In response, can I just say, Chair, I'm very clear that I want to be as helpful as I can possibly be to the committee, and obviously to be as open and transparent as you would expect. But can I just explain that there are at least 3 investigations and review processes underway, and the Minister has initiated 2 of them. And I think it's very important that everybody understands that we have a collective responsibility to examine and consider all the facts. This is in effect a whistleblowing case and needs to be treated as such. So, for example, these are governed by Good Practice Guide on Whistleblowing in the Public Service, which is endorsed by the audit offices here and in England, Wales and in Scotland, and it's also been promulgated by DFP in their guidance. And, for example, one of the key recommendations in the report is that investigations are undertaken by people with the necessary experience and expertise. And in recognition of that, that's why the Minister appointed and arranged for the appointment of our Chief Internal Auditor to scope the investigation with the input of Mr Scott. Now, depending on the outcome of that work, DFP will then consider whether and how the full investigation is going to be taken forward. And again, this is absolutely consistent with the guidance on whistleblowing in the public sector, which recognises the need to put together a properly qualified team and the need to put in place arrangements to avoid any potential or perceived conflict of interest. Now, clearly there are matters arising in the course of investigation where there's going to be difference of opinion, and it's right that those should be debated and discussed. But the point I want to make is that to avoid the department appearing to dispute facts or dispute allegations or perceptions before Mr Scott has been given the opportunity to formally record and agree the evidence, this would undermine the independence of the investigation and wouldn't be consistent with our duty of care. So for that reason, all I can do is seek to correct misperceptions, and I'm very happy to cooperate as far as I can.
I just reiterate, I think, the point that the committee will want to follow the issues through fully, to investigate, to inquire, interrogate fully all the aspects that are relevant here. There is no desire in any way to create difficulties for any other process, but other processes should not, in our view, thwart, constrict, constrain, hold back, or create areas where that's a no-go area. There may be issues around personnel matters in regard to Sport NI, which are internal matters, but beyond that, and one would have to respect those, but more generally, we need to get to the bottom of those big questions about issues that were identified in the media long before Mr Scott came to this committee. There were issues that were brought to the attention of the public by the BBC prior to that. Some weeks, in fact, it's been back for a period of time. So this is something that is out there already, apart from what Mr Scott presented to the committee. We need to look at these things fully, comprehensively, and we'll intend to do that. I don't think it would be acceptable for the committee to be constrained. So we will expect full answers to all of the issues. Now, as I said, we don't have points of order. The point has been made, and I'll leave it there. The first person to ask a question was Cathal Hushin.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, very much. I suppose maybe the point there, in that we have the three processes in place: the investigation, the review, and the inquiry. And it is very much, as I said, when the inquiry was voted on within this committee, that we would invariably run into duplication, and indeed that process on the the investigation, the review, and inquiry might indeed prejudice each other in terms of information. That's notwithstanding that the information should be available there, but this was the risk that we took in launching an inquiry whilst an investigation and review went on.
Questions for
yeah. Well, I want to just put that on the record as well. As it stands at the moment, then, so the approval of the design has been issued, and we await the approval to build at some point in the short to medium term. Has the concerns as raised by the chair of the Safety Technical Group, particularly in terms of the exit strategy, have those assessments been raised? Have they been preemptively raised? And is it too early for those assessments to be taken on board as of now?
I'll just say that, just to underline the point that I made earlier, is that the design process is still underway.
Yeah.
The design work has not yet been completed. And
so the approval is only for the design process to commence?
That's right. The design
and obviously,
work,
once it's completed, then it has to be
yes,
approved again?
Yes.
So we're really at a very early stage here.
Absolutely. The design is taken, put quite, I suppose, simply, the design is taken to a certain stage by the design team. That's important. The contractor conducts his, in a design and build contract, he also conducts design work as well. And only when that has been completed satisfactorily and in line with seeking statutory approvals and any other approvals that are required, would the construction notice then issue. And the construction notice is the key part in terms of giving the approval and the go-ahead to begin construction work. So only the approval to begin the design part of that process has been given. The design work is still underway.
And notwithstanding that safety issues must be paramount in the development of any stadia, IB and stadia of almost on a weekly basis, notwithstanding that, what we are doing, or a lot of what we are doing, possibly in this inquiry and possibly maybe in the investigation as well, is academic.
I would just point out again that we are at a stage where the approval to design has been given. We haven't yet approved through the issue of the construction notice the building, and that building work will not take place until all the necessary approvals have been met, both in terms of the what's required under the funding agreement, and secondly under the contractual obligations, which, as I've said in my introductory remarks, are to meet statutory approvals. And I can just also say that there's a step, and just to point out and highlight, and I know this was a point raised last week by the Minister, but very clearly there's a separate safety certification process for stadia, and it's just important that the committee is aware that the stadium will not be used until a safety certificate is issued under the Safety at Sports Ground Northern Ireland Order 2006. That safety certificate will only be issued when the Belfast City Council are satisfied that it can be issued. So there's a separate statutory regime that covers safety at sports ground, as it does as well, for example, planning process.
And there is substantive safeguards within the entire process. As is, you're satisfied with the safeguards within the process?
The whole process is being organised and delivered in accordance with managing successful programmes, and this is recognised best practice in delivering major programmes. I provided the department provided the committee on the 12th of May with full details of those structures. For example, we have a series of just to give the committee a sense of the programme management structure, which I think might be helpful. We have a programme management structure where we have a programme sponsor board, which is chaired by the Minister. Below that sits the programme board, which I would sit, which has overall responsibility for delivering the objectives of the programme and ensuring that the very important business benefits, economic benefits and cultural benefits from the programme are delivered. Beneath that sits 3 individual projects for each of the 3 parts of the programme, i.e. the delivery of the Kingspan Stadium for Ulster Rugby, the delivery of Windsor Park for the IFA, and then thirdly the delivery of Casement Park for the Ulster GAA. And beyond that, there are a whole series of protocols and funding agreements and business cases and contractual agreements, as you would expect in a major contract on a major capital build programme of this size and scale.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was come to David Hill as you know, but I just wanted to pose a couple of points there. And just an observation, you did rightly say that the stadium would not be used without a safety certificate, which would specify a number of people that could be there as spectators. The concern of the committee was that you could end up building a stadium that had a capacity for, say, 38,000, but only get a certificate for 20,000, which would be a rather ludicrous and unacceptable situation. And it was that connection there that was hugely important.
Yes, maybe I could respond to that, Chair. Yes, I mean, I do appreciate absolutely, Chair, what you're saying. I mean, as you very eloquently said, the stadium could not be used, even if it were built, if that wouldn't be able to meet a safety certificate capacity. So it wouldn't ever be used, and certainly that would be a different argument, would be a value for money argument. But that case won't happen because no approval will be given to construct until all statutory obligations are met.
So a situation could never arise where a stadium was built that had a seating capacity that was in excess of what eventually went on the safety certificate.
Could I just again quote again what it says in the contract? The design and build contract, which is signed by the contractor, says that there's an obligation to liaise with the statutory authorities, licensing and other approving and advisory bodies, and attaining statutory and advisory body sign-off. And I think that makes the position quite clear.
So am I right then in saying that it would be impossible to get to a situation where you actually build a stadium and then it gets a safety certificate that's lower than the actual capacity, the physical capacity?
The safety certificate are issued on an event-by-event basis. Now, clearly, I think the point that you're making, Chair, is that clearly there would be a very big value for money question if you designed and built a stadium that couldn't ultimately attain a safety certificate for the capacity, the maximum capacity for which it is built. Our requirement is that the stadium will be capable of meeting the safety certificate requirements in terms of the capacity of the stadium.
I suppose
that's
maybe,
not quite the same as saying.
maybe
It's
Chair,
very different actually from saying the point that you could actually end up building a stadium that's bigger than the number that actually appears eventually on this.
Can I maybe, Chair, just to add a point of clarification? I think, you know, the question is it impossible? I suppose one of the issues around that is with any capital build, it's built at a point in time, and then over time, often regulations change. So is it possible that you have a stadium that 30 years from now, you know, would receive a safety certificate today?
Sure.
30 years from now is in a different situation. I think that's why it's difficult to be absolutely definitive.
I'm thinking there just though in terms of the term of the contract.
Yes.
The whatever it's red or green book, whichever, doesn't change that often.
Yes.
So it's quite a number of years.
No, and I think that to be specific then, in order to proceed to the next stage, there needs to be satisfactory professional technical assurances in place for the SRO to be able to sign that off, to be able to say, now we're ready to move to the build stage. That has to be in place. Now, normally what happens in a process at that point is you do a gateway review of the project. And the gateway review will usually come in and look at all of the documentation, we'll look at what's there, we'll look at the design. So that would happen in any case. But I don't know, Cynthia, if that's helpful, just to...
Yes, absolutely. Just to say, at key decision points, there are a whole series of processes, technical advice, sign-offs, documentation, approvals protocols. So those are all in place at key decision points, key milestones.
Just two other short questions. One is, it was mentioned there that the design wasn't yet completed. I find it difficult to understand how you can therefore get planning permission, although that was eventually something that was dealt with in judicial review. How do you get planning permission for a design that's not yet completed?
Could I just maybe, I think it might be really helpful if I could make two points in response to that, Chair. Well, first of all, could I just maybe refer the committee to the judgment in the judicial review in December and to Justice Horner's, and if I could quote from him, please. What he says is that in order for the ground to operate, it requires a certificate, and under Article 5, the Safety of Sports Ground Northern Ireland Order. Regulation 5.1 states that a safety certificate shall contain such terms and conditions as the Council considers necessary or expedient to secure reasonable safety at the sport ground when it is in use for the specified activity or activities, and the terms and conditions may be such as to involve alterations or additions to the sports ground. Without a safety certificate, a sports ground cannot be used. However, there is a regulatory regime in place to ensure sports grounds are safe and can operate safely.
But that's maybe not quite the same as what I was asking there. If, as was said there, the design is not yet completed,
Yes.
how do you submit an incomplete design? What design do you actually submit for planning permission?
Can I just be very clear on that as well? Under the design and build practice, and this is not unusual at all, Chair, just to make it very clear that design work takes place and it's designed to a certain stage. And this is set out very clearly in a works description. And at that stage, then, planning approval is sought. Once planning approval has been obtained, further design work can then take place, because this is a design and build contract. So the design work gets to a certain stage to allow planning approval to be sought. The contractor under a design and build contract can then undertake further design work, and that can often be really a helpful thing, because the contractor themselves can see what further design work needs to be taken place in order to meet the terms of the contract. And sorry,
no, I was just going to say that's not an unusual process. That happens right the way across the public sector in capital projects. Where
and can I just say too that this is exactly the same process that took place at Kingspan and Ravenhill, and it will be the same process, and also at Windsor Park.
Okay, others may wish to follow up on that point. Final question there. The Stadium Sponsor Board, when did it last meet?
Yeah, I will just, if you would just give me 1 minute, I will just get you the details of that. Okay, okay, Chair, I just wanted to give you a really accurate picture on that. This maybe just might be helpful to the committee if I just say a few things about the sponsor board. The stadium sponsor board was established by Decal back in December 2011. I mentioned earlier that the sponsor board is chaired by the Minister and includes myself as the programme SRO and senior representatives from the governing bodies. The purpose of the board is to report to the Minister as to the progress of the programme, provide a forum for the governing bodies to raise any issues, and advise the programme SRO to assist with overseeing the delivery of the programme. The first meeting of the board took place on the 1st of December 2011. The last meeting took place on the 19th of March. That was the 21st meeting of the programme sponsor
19th
board.
of March this year.
Yes, and that was the 21st meeting of the sponsor board.
Okay. We've requested minutes of those meetings, so we'll get that information about the dates of all the meetings and we'll discuss in due course. It was just a general overview. Okay, thank you. David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Anthony, for coming along this morning. We're establishing that we're in a very, very early stage as far as design goes. At this stage,
What I'm saying is design has not been completed. It is still underway. It hasn't been finalised. It has reached a certain stage, but it hasn't yet been completed.
What stage are we at with design? We're told it's early. We're now somewhat down the road from the JR, and the time seems to have went on fairly well since this all kicked off
Yes,
to try and get this stadium in position. I'm a bit confused with this very early stage.
Maybe I didn't say early stage. I said design
Do you
is
agree
not
with the
been
question
completed.
that was put to you?
Not been completed. It's still underway. Hasn't been finalised. I wonder would it be helpful if I just maybe took the committee through a timeline of the project? It might just help to put in your minds and put it into context. If that would be helpful, Chair. Just taking back to March 2011, and Chair, you'll have good recollections of this. This was the time of the OBC being approved. This was followed then in October 2011 with the business plan approved, and then there was a programme gateway. We mentioned that at various regular intervals we get independent assurance as to the state of the programme, and the first of those took place in October 2011 at programme level. There was pre-design work took place in the early part of 2012, and then we had the appointment in September 2012 of the design team, the ICT, Integrated Consultant Team. We then had another programme gateway in October 2012. This was followed then by further work on design and the submission about mid-2013 of the planning application for planning approval. That took some 6 months to determine, and it was December when we were notified that planning approval was being granted. I think the official notice came out in January in 2014, but it was granted then at the end of 2013. This then was followed with a gateway review, which was a Gateway 3 review on the actual project, the Casement Park project, on the investment decision. Then we talked about the various approval processes that are required to go to various key milestones. The final business case was then approved. The funding agreement was executed to allow funding to be released, and the contractor, the design and build contractor, appointed in December 2013. So since then, the design development by the contractor, who is Heron Buckingham joint venture, proceeds. In April, then, the JR process started. In September 2014, the hearing commenced. In November, the hearing was completed, and in December, then we got the JR determination. So hopefully that's helpful, maybe in giving a bit of context in terms of the timelines for the various key stages in the Casement Park project.
Yes, because just the letter here from Populous obviously stating that they're confirming the current design proposal complies with such X, Y, and Z, and that's over a year ago, which seems a bit strange that we're sort of still in design and we're actually confirming the current design proposal.
I think what's been said in previous evidence is that the stadium is compliant to normal standards. What they think the issue that is obviously of concern to the committee is in terms of emergency exiting, and clearly that design work is still ongoing in relation to that.
But the problem is, Cynthia, and probably that's only a follow on from the Chair's question, the problems are so extensive out there that they're probably going to have to get back to the drawing board. We've now spent about £6 million of public money on something that is going to have to be so thoroughly redesigned it's going to have to seek planning permission again. That's part of the problem out there. You know, we can flurry it up all day here as long as we want, but the evidence presented to the committee to date is substantial in nature, and with timelines and whatnot, you just wonder where we would have been if things hadn't got caught up in JRs and whatnot.
Can I assure you that it's one of the areas that we've asked the technically focused project assessment review, which has been conducted by the Major Projects Authority, and they will be looking at those very questions, and I'm very happy to be guided by their recommendations and their advice.
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult situation for everybody involved, there's no doubt about it, because the week before Mr. Scott came in here to tell us all about it, and from his end of things, yourselves were here in front of us, and obviously yourself, Cynthia, stated we've been taking the advice of the Safety Technical Group on board, and any decision will be informed by all this. That's not what we're sort of being told at the minute. It is really important that we have very strong communications between the various parties involved, and the work of the Safety Technical Group, the department, the GAA, design team. None of that has actually been happening, because we've also documentation to say that the STG have been asking for the emergency exiting plans for some 18 months to 2 years with an absolute blanket. Nothing coming forward whatsoever. Why is that? Where's decal in all this? Why have they been ignoring those requests to try and get over these hurdles?
Can I say, firstly, we haven't been ignoring the advice of the Safety Technical Group. The processes are still ongoing in that we're still designing in relation to emergency exit. So those processes are still ongoing. The design has not yet been completed. What I've asked the technical review to look at, and that's one of the aspects I will be asking them, I have asked them to look at, is in terms of the very point that you raise. And as I said, I'll be guided by their technical advice.
That will be interesting. Just following on from that, what was the structure of the reporting mechanism in the project from yourself as a senior responsible officer? I was with the Minister here last week at the very top of the pile there, but where does it drill down? And we've had various people in front of us over various years now telling us all about it. Some of it we're obviously having to question at this stage. But what is the chain of command down through the project as such?
Can I just maybe, if I could maybe talk you through just some of the processes and decision-making process, and maybe it would be helpful if I could point out in relation, say, to the stadium board and the structures there. Again, if I could refer back to the department's 12th of May letter, we put out in some detail there what the programme governance structures were, but I'm very happy to go through it. You know, the Stadium Programme Board, for example, was formally constituted to provide advice and assurance to enable us to make recommendations and to proceed at key milestones in the programme. So can I give you an example? It would maybe be helpful in sort of describing that process. So, you know, if you look at the Stadium programme, you know, I've described, I think, in talking through the timeline, what key decision and milestone points there are. So, for example, a key milestone point would be the approval of the full business case. A next key milestone in terms of the...
It's maybe not the milestones, yes. the structure as such, who reports to who? Who's below yourself coming down? You had the Minister here last week with yourself. So with various project officers before us, some with decal officials, some without decal officials, with minutes here and notes and emails where Decal withdrew from the STG early on and whatnot and stuff, and basically, in my opinion, it virtually ignored it. I know you're going to say different, but it really does look at that's the way it's been because of the request over the last year. It's been totally ignored. Just what is the reporting structure down the line?
Let me just, maybe it'd be really helpful if I talk you through it. As I've said earlier, the methodology that we use is managing successful programmes, and that's the methodology we use to deliver it and to form the structures and programme. And this is an accepted methodology in order to deliver successfully major programmes in both public and also in private sector organisations, and that includes a whole set of principles and processes which we use when managing a programme. So one of the key principles under that managing successful programmes is that you have a defined, as you were saying, organisational structure to enable effective programme governance. So the structure that we have developed in order to implement the stadium programme consists at the top level of a stadium programme sponsor board. Now, I can talk you through what each of those do. You know, beneath that, a stadium programme board. Beneath that, then, we have project boards, one for each of the individual projects, for the 3 projects, and project steering groups, again, for each of the 3 stadia projects.
I'm really referring to, from the committee's point of view, maybe I didn't make that clear, from the committee's point of view and the persons that land at the bottom end of the table to report to us, how does that come down the line? Who should be here, who shouldn't be here?
Yeah. Well, really...
Some people stayed away from us. Why did we not know about these issues? That's what I'm trying to drill down to, you know.
The whole... Well, what I can say is that there are very clearly procedures and escalation procedures and management procedures set out in all the documentation here. I think one of the documents which is, I think, really helpful in terms of setting out the various roles and responsibilities and really to assure the committee that we have recognised best practice in place here in terms of good programme management is set out in the Memorandum of Understanding here between ourselves, the Department and the GAA, for example. And I think that...
So who reports to us as the committee? Give us the updates. Should that have been Decal themselves, or should it have been jointly with the project management team and Decal? Because sometimes people are coming here on their own and didn't have Decal officials with them. I don't know whether that was delivered or not. Ian, if you were suspicious, you would say.
I'm very happy. I mean, my role is overall, as I said, my role is to ensure the programme meets its objectives. The programme as a whole, encompassing the 3 individual projects, meets its objectives and delivers its benefits. Beneath that, we have 3 individual projects, one for each of the stadia. Their role is in terms of delivering each of those individual projects on time, on budget, in accordance with the governance structures, in accordance with value for money considerations, ensure that the proper processes are followed at each of those key stages. And then on top of that, you have one overall oversight body chaired by the Minister, which ensures that overall this important programme for government objective is on target, it's going to deliver, and it's going to deliver the very significant benefits that it was set up and designed to deliver.
I'm not sure I got the answer there, to be honest, I have to say, Chair.
It'd be really helpful.
It is difficult, but you're left with the problem at the minute of a project which is potentially going to be a white elephant if it had went ahead to where you really wanted it to get to, despite design modifications or whatever. It really needs to get back to redesign, and certainly if I was a resident of that area, I would be certainly paying very close attention to what's been said here today. Chair, I'll come back later on.
I think, just following on from what Mr. Lewis said there, I think the difficulty for members, or one of the difficulties is, we got the diagram setting out the various entities, the steering groups, project boards, stadium programme, SRO and all the rest of it. And in a sense, it all focuses around the stadium programme SRO, which is obviously yourself, in that you're chairing the stadium programme board, which then meets prior to the meetings of the stadium sponsor board. I think it says here it meets, will normally meet. The board will normally meet 2 weeks in advance of the sponsor board meetings, which were to be normally every 6 weeks. and ad hoc meetings can be arranged as required. So information would come up through the system, but in a sense, it should all come to yourself as the SRO at some point, if the system's working properly. That would be the case. And the question...
I'm only trying to get who should have come along and told
Yes.
us what the problems were potentially a year or so that all be overcome and resolved and we can all move forward with the thing built.
It's this issue we have in writing. We're aware of that. There were issues being raised whatever number of months ago, 18 months ago, is it? Whatever period of time. And yet it's only now, belatedly. So were these issues about egress? Now, not about the extent of the egress. The Minister said she was aware that there were egress issues, but she was not aware of the extent of them. When did yourself as the SRO become aware that there were egress issues, and what did you understand to be the extent of them?
Can I just make it clear again, and I will answer your question, Chair. My responsibilities, as I said, I'm accountable for ensuring that the stadium programme meets its objectives and delivers its benefits. So, for example, that will include appointment of the programme director, making sure that staff are there, making sure the expenditure is released in accordance with the financial control framework, and recommending approval of the full business case. So, in terms of health and safety is clearly a key element that's going to be considered in any major construction contract of this nature. Clearly, it's going to be an area where there's going to be ongoing discussion and debate and technical advice and discussion. What I'm saying to the committee is that those discussions are still underway and that the design work hasn't yet been completed. So final design work has still not been completed. It's still underway. The stadium, the agreement to go to the next stage in the building of the stadium will not take place until we've satisfied all those statutory requirements.
And I appreciate that entirely, but just to ask again the question, when, as the SRO, did you become aware that there were concerns about egress from the stadium, emergency egress? Who told you, and what did they tell you?
Just to be clear, one way, for example, is one way that in which and there are clear methods for escalating issues. One clear method, for example, is through a risk register. And management and risks and issues are clearly an integral part of managing the stadium.
We're aware of a number of risk registers.
Yes.
Which risk register is this one?
Yeah, there's a risk register both at programme level and also at project level. I mean, clearly, safety issues are under discussion throughout the design process, and hence we set up Safety Technical Group, and let's just remember it was the department that set up the Safety Technical Group to provide us with that advice throughout the design process. That design process is still undergoing. Health and safety issues would be a normal part of those discussions.
Could I interrupt there? Because our time would be against us, we'll run out of time. Could I ask again the question?
Yes.
When did you become aware, as the SRO, that there were issues around egress? Who told you, and what did they tell you?
Clearly the work would have been, I was absolutely aware that there were ongoing discussions on health and safety issues.
About egress?
On emergency exiting.
Yes.
On emergency exiting in general. And clearly that's an important part, obviously, of the
When did you become aware of that, and who told you, what did they tell you?
I could say, what I can say, for example, is in terms of the identification through a formal risk register process. So, for example, in terms of the programme board, a risk would have been registered on our risk register at a certain stage.
Yeah, and I could ask again the question.
Yes.
When did they tell you, whether it's recorded in the risk register or whatever, when did you, as the SRO, the senior responsible officer, when did you become aware that there were issues around emergency egress? Who told you, and what did they tell you?
I would have been aware from normal day-to-day discussions with the stadium team, with the programme director, and with...
That would have been Noel Malloy or Rory Muskelly?
Well, one preceded the other.
Yeah, so that, the question is at what point it was raised?
Well, both would be, obviously, health and safety would be an ongoing area for discussion. And obviously, these areas would be discussed at regular points. And what I was aware is that there were ongoing discussions, that those discussions hadn't yet been completed because the design work was still underway. And that's what I can tell the committee. So I was aware that there was various options being looked at, various alternatives, and various further design work and modelling taking place.
And when would that have been?
That would have been, during the period when the design work was as it is still taking place.
Yes, but when did you first become? I don't want to be difficult around this, but I just have to ask the question again and again because I'm not getting an answer. When did you first become aware? Was it in 2012, January, what month, what year?
I want to be very clear that developing the design was part of and clearly health and safety issues were part of the discussions. And if I can just sort of take you back to the Casement Park timeline again. I mean, the design team would have been working on the design from September 2012. So as part of that, there would have been ongoing design work taking place. Right up to submission of the planning application in July. Planning permission was then granted in December. There would then have been further design development by the contractor, the design and build contractor. So all through those processes, there would have been consideration of design and emergency exit. So that would be an ongoing part of the process.
Not addressing the problem.
People were aware of these issues, but it seems that nothing was done about it because we still, at the end of all of this, there was no exiting plan. There was a request for one, it never appeared. The issue was let run. Millions of pounds are spent. We end up with judicial reviews. We end up with the situation we're in where a major and important project is being delayed inordinately because of a failure to address these issues. So they started planning or designing it in September 2012. How soon after that did you become aware, and who told you?
Chair, I am trying to answer this question as fully as I can. I'm telling you that the design work commenced. There was pre-ICT design work taking place in the early part of 2012. Once the design team was appointed in September 2012, there would have been further design work. This would have been underway right until, and as I've explained previously, it would have been taken. The design work would have been taken to a certain stage to enable the planning application to be submitted. Once then the planning approval was granted in December 2013 and the funding agreement executed and the design and build contractor appointed, further design work would have been taking place by the contractor. And then the JR took place in April.
I have to say, I still feel I don't have an answer to my question because you haven't told me who actually told you. As an individual, could you tell me the name of the person who told you this?
My normal communication would be through the programme director.
So that would be, was that Noel Malloy or Rory Muskelly first raised these issues with you?
Well, it would have been, obviously it would have been the first programme director.
So that's Noel Malloy?
Yes, and that would be...
Right, okay, we've got the right person now. He raised the issue. When did he raise it with you?
I haven't got... And the reason I haven't got a precise date is because this would be an ongoing part of the discussions.
Okay.
This would be an on... Can I just maybe make it really clear for the committee? Health and safety issues are an ongoing part of the design
and we
process.
appreciate that. But
And similarly, emergency exiting design work and arrangements would also be discussed as part of that process. So that would be an ongoing process. There would be ongoing work by the design team. And clearly that process would have been ongoing. And what I'm saying to the committee is that that design work has not yet been completed.
And I appreciate that. But we've now clarified the point that at some point after September 2012, when the design work really got underway, Noel Mulloy raised these issues with yourself as the SRO.
He didn't raise, what he raised with me was that there was ongoing design work, which I would have been,
So he didn't spell out the detail of
I
what
would have been aware that there was work going on with the design team throughout this process, and that health and safety was obviously an ongoing part of that work. And as part of that work, they would have been taking advice from STG. They would have also been liaising clearly with the various with the various teams, taking various technical advice. This would have been a process. It's hard to nail down, Chair, into, I think you want one specific date or something, but this is a process. I have to just keep underlining that the development of a major build, a major capital build, is a process. This is a process, an iterative process of designing and then building a major capital project. Health and safety issues are an integral part of that design
Absolutely,
process.
and some people would like us to live in a paperless world, but we don't. So you go to meetings and somebody takes a note of it. Are there no records in DCAL about this?
There are ongoing iterations in a note.
Are there references in those iterations? Presumably those iterations were down on paper.
The iterations would be the normal cut and thrust of design development.
But somebody must write something down somewhere.
Can I just say, Chair, that these are no different. This is no different from the process that would have taken place in other major capital projects. This is.
Can I just add? Can I add a point? Cynthia, you've referred to the risk registers, and we've talked about the risk registers. The risk registers clearly record this. There are the minutes that you've requested, Chair, will be coming through, and clearly they will reference at different points that health and safety issues were discussed. So those are recorded. Those issues are recorded in various minutes. Obviously you'll want to look at that in terms of the extent they're recorded and how they're recorded and so on, but they are recorded and they have been recorded, as my understanding.
And I think that's how we get the. I mean, it would be helpful if you yourselves would go back and check through all that paperwork to find out at what point, because that is the core issue in people's minds. Why was nothing done if people knew, and who did know, and when did they know?
I think I'm very happy, and I think you have got a set of minutes, but if you'd like us to go through them again and highlight issues, and clearly you can also have the risk registers as well when they would be recorded. Very happy for the committee to have those as well.
I'm sure we'll be discussing this later on about that. Just one final question was, as regards the non-attendance of DCAL at the STG, who took the decision that DCAL would withdraw from the STG, and were you aware of it?
This is one of the areas where we will be getting information. In fact, I do not have information about that. It's one of the facts that has.
But were you aware that they had withdrawn?
It is one of the facts that has to be established as part of the investigation, which is underway.
So, let me ask you again then. Did DCAL withdraw from the STG? Did they stop attending it at some point?
I cannot answer that, Chair, because there's clearly a dispute of the facts there. I mean, we have different versions, and what I want to get at is what are the facts.
So that's what this committee wants.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as well.
And the purpose of the investigation is to get at those facts. Who said what at what point, and that's what I'm very keen to establish.
I think we'll
Chair.
have to discuss this, but it would be important then. I mean, there's no point in coming along here, and thank you for coming, but if we can't get answers to questions. So that's a fundamental question. It was raised in this committee, everyone's aware of it. There was a statement made that DCAL stopped attending the STG. I would have thought as a department, and I'm putting this to the Permanent Secretary, I would have thought that within the department already people would be ferreting around to find out who originally attended, when did they stop attending, why did they stop attending, who told them to stop attending, did they get permission to stop attending, what was the reason given for no longer attending, who made the decision and why and when.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, and it's something, certainly those are answers I'll be very keen to see. However, the issue here is, and this is where we do get into the practical issue, if you go beyond whatever papers are there, how then do you go to the next stage and actually find out those facts by asking people the questions? Now, I'm very aware of the fact that as soon as we got into an independent investigation, which remember is going to be reported to the FP, we need to be very careful here that, you know, I'm not sort of ringing up people who've made the claims in the first place, or ringing up people who have to respond to it, because that might appear as if somehow we're trying to influence the answers to people. So that's why it's just that it's to give you a sense of this is the practical implication of this. I know when we say that there's issues that are difficult for us to respond on. In a sense, it's almost difficult for the department to defend on, because we need to wait. We need to wait to see what people come forward and say. And I think so. It's as much not to cut across this inquiry as it is to not to cut across the other processes. So that's just to give you that. That's why I haven't been in a position to start going beyond whatever papers are there.
Well, then let me just ask a very simple question to the SRO. Were you aware that DCAL was no longer represented at the STG?
Again, I think those are matters that we have to leave to the...
No, that's... I'm sorry, I must press this point. We're not talking about asking somebody else. I'm asking you as the SRO, were you aware that DCAL was not represented at the STG?
I was aware that there were ongoing discussions...
No, that's not the question. And I put the question again, and I hope being respectful in asking the way that I asked them. And I would ask that respect is shown to the committee in that answers are actually given. Were you aware that the department was not represented on the STG?
I was not aware that that engagement had stopped with the STG, and I was not specific.
Again,
and I was not
let me
specific.
be precise, not just that engagement had stopped.
Yeah.
That's a vague term.
Yeah.
Were you aware that DCAL was no longer attending, representatives were no longer attending the STG?
No, but no.
That's okay. That's the answer is no. That's fine. That's grand.
But can I just say, I want to be absolutely clear to the committee, but my understanding is clearly that engagement continued. That's what I would say.
No longer attended. Okay, thank you. Gordon
Just
Dunn.
to be clear that engagement
Chair.
did continue.
Thanks, Cynthia, and Dennis for coming in again. We appreciate it. It's not easy sitting there. You mentioned early on about obviously a number of issues. You talked about October 2012, with the establishment of an ICT.
Yes.
What is an ICT?
It's an integrated consultants team, and it's one of the technical terms. You and I would know it as a design team.
Right. Okay. Is there an argument that the STG should have been included at that stage? I understand that the whole project is run under standards and requirements of CPD. Would that be correct?
Yes, it's structured and organised and management under managing successful programmes. Individual projects would also use elements of Prince methodology as well. It's another project management tool. So it would be organised, structured, and governance arrangements would be in accordance with that best practice guidance.
The standards, and those standards managed by CPD, would that be right?
Yes, that would be a recognised process and tool for managing major programmes, and it would be recommended and certainly acknowledged by Central Procurement Division in the Department of Finance and Personnel.
Is there not an argument then that the STG should have been involved right at the start? Something I brought up before. Right at the start, when you talked about the integrated team, to me, integrated involves everyone. And government departments have looked at this over the years. I'm sure you are very much aware of this, about involving all the stakeholders right at the very start. Whether you're responsible for maintaining the building or whether you're health and safety or whatever, all those are brought in at the very start of a project, along with the customer, if you want, or the customers, and everyone gets involved. So, sitting here as a layperson, I would have expected that safety was paramount, and you've made that very clear all along. It's a major, major factor, as is quality, as is cost, and all of those other factors that make up a project. Surely safety should have been right in there at the start. And is that a major failure that they weren't part of the integrated project team?
The integrated project team is the design team that's appointed in order to take forward the design for the project. The safety technical group was set up by DCAL, so there would be liaison between the safety technical group and the individual project boards as well, and through their steering groups, and then also with the department through the team in the department. What I would say is that I think there are needs, but I will be guided clearly by the major projects authorities' independent project assessment in this. But I would have thought that there would have been need for protocols. I think would assist in terms of stating the terms of the engagement between and across the safety technical group and the various structures.
You see, we all have listened to evidence to date, and there does seem to be, in relation to the steering group, the safety technical group, a clear lack of authority and a clear lack of involvement with the whole project. And the project leader, or the steering group chairman, was here and put a genuine case, and his frustration and lack of those that were communicating with him and the lack of action in relation to the points raised was very clear. So we all have, we've come to a conclusion that the STG were not properly involved in this project right from the start. Would you tend to agree with that?
The safety technical group was set up, as I said, by the department as a sort of multi-agency group, which was there to really provide the department with specialist advice. But what I will say is that, and it's very clear,
is there a risk that the fact that they weren't fully engaged, is there now a risk that the points that they've raised weren't adhered to? Because they weren't in the centre of the process?
Again, that's one of the issues that I think will be teased out, but more fully in both the investigation and in terms of the review. And I'm very happy to be guided by the outcomes of those if they come up with recommendations.
Okay, so it could clearly be a risk. Just on a number of other issues, Chair. You said that the approvals were taken to the design stage. Was that actually signed off? Was the documentation signed off? Just clarify that point for the design.
No. What I've said is that there are key milestones in any major programme, and the first of those is the agreement to set off the process of the design work. That design work has been taken to a certain stage. The design and build contractor has then been appointed, and what I've said is that he will not be able, the contractor will not be able to proceed to building contract until all the processes have been completed, the pre-construction processes, which means completion of all the design processes, which enables it to meet statutory requirements and get all the various approvals that it will require. So that construction can't happen until those have finally been signed off, as you put it, and that hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened, but yet the stadium did have planning permission, full planning permission, isn't that right? It did have.
And that's not unusual, because the design would have been taken to a certain stage, and it's clearly set out in a work schedule. So the design would be taken to a certain stage. Planning permission would then be sought. Once it's granted, then the design and build contractor is appointed. He then completes that design work before he's given the approval to go ahead with construction. That final stage has not yet taken place.
Hasn't yet.
So the designs have not been signed off.
So the actual planning approval then could be subject to a lot of amendments. Could have been subject to amendments. Could that have been the case, that there would have been considerable amendments to be made, considering the design wasn't complete, which I find strange and rather unacceptable, to be honest.
Can I just reiterate again that this was the same process followed as has been followed in the other two projects?
Does that mean it's right? Does that mean it's right?
Well, it's accepted under good management. I mean,
Doesn't mean it's right.
Clearly, I'm guided by technical advice. And
Yes, we appreciate that.
The technical advice. Sorry, just to be clear, we're running and operating this project in accordance with best practice in managing major projects of this nature. At a certain stage in the design process, you get to the stage where the design, and then is at a sufficiently advanced stage that it then can be submitted for planning approval. So just to be clear, the area that we're looking at here is emergency exiting. This is one very important part of the design, but it's one part. The design has got to a certain stage which enables it to go forward under a work schedule to seek planning approval. There is further design work, particularly in relation to emergency exiting.
So
undertaken.
So we'll go back to my other point. So it could well have been subject to further approvals by planning then. It could well have been if all of these issues of the design have not yet been finalised, if you've said.
There would be further approvals required as part of the further design process. Building would not take place until all those various approvals and authorisations would have taken place. This is the normal process that takes place in terms of a major construction project. What I will be asking, and what I have asked the Major Project Authority, will provide independent advice and assurance in relation to these matters.
Right. Just, Chairman, to date then, as the Senior SRO, the Senior Reporting Responsibility Officer, Senior Responsible Officer for the project, are you satisfied then, since that all documentation is compliant with the statutory requirements to date? All documentation that has came through you as the senior civil servant responsible for the project, are you satisfied that all that documentation is compliant with all the required standards for health and safety, quality, cost, etc., all the requirements of a major project? Are you satisfied to date that all that documentation is compliant? Last week you were unable to answer that. Today maybe you have reviewed and thought of it.
I think that's a very definitive statement to say that if you looked over every single piece of paper that has been produced by a project.
And you know, and you're trying to avoid the question. I'm not asking you to do that, but you have responsible officers who do that and account to you. Now it's your job as a senior responsible officer to give us assurance as elected representatives of government that all the documentation that was presented to you was compliant and met the requirements of all the statutory bodies and the standards to date in relation to Casement Park. Can you give us that assurance, yes or no?
I do want to answer the question fully and completely, as you would expect me to do. I can just explain that the key approvals, you've asked me which key approvals come to me and that I have approved. The ones that come to me as SRO of the programme are in terms, there are key milestones, and these are very clearly set out in accordance with established practice. I am responsible for recommending approval, for example, of the, and I use this as an example, and I'm doing this in the helpful way to help assist the committee in understanding the process. So, for example, the full business case, I think your question focuses around to how am I seeking my assurance and what documentation?
No, I'm asking, can you give us that assurance today that all documentation is compliant to date in relation to Casement Park that came before you? Can you give us that assurance?
In terms
yes or no?
I'm really trying to be helpful here.
With all due respect, it's a yes or no, sir.
Right. Obviously, if you're not getting an answer.
Can you give us that assurance to
Can I
date.
just say, I operate in good faith in terms of, and in terms of the assurances that are coming to me.
I understand
in
that,
terms, and absolutely. And in terms of the key milestones which I have been responsible for recommending approval of, or recommending to the accounting officer they approve. For example, in terms of enabling the appointment of the design team, and money to be released to appoint that. And secondly, in terms of the approval to enable the contractor to be appointed, the design and build contractor, that would have been based on a whole series of approvals, funding agreements, recommendations, assurance statements, casework committees, assurance from boards, input from economists, etc. I mean, I got sufficient...
And the STG, I take it? And the STG?
I keep repeating that the design has not been signed off. So the design work has not been signed off. That still is underway.
Not satisfied, Chairman, but thank you very much.
Rosie McCorney.
Carly, and thank you very much for the presentation. And I have to say, I think you've been extremely patient in the answers you've given today. I just want to, suppose, clarify some points, because I maybe have been hearing things differently from people, other people in the room. So maybe I'm taking a very simplistic view of things, but let me just say what I think about it. This is about the exiting arrangements and concerns raised about exiting arrangements, that they were going to put people in danger, that they were going... I was getting the impression that nearly they were about to be signed off on. So I've heard you today, and so if I can just clarify that this is still part of a process. Those issues of concern are still a matter for discussion. And I mean, that being the case, can you just confirm that that's where it's at?
Yes.
Okay. Then can I say that, or can I ask, the point where it will move on will be when it gets approval for the construction stage, when it gets the go-ahead. If it came to that point, if there were any issues of concern about exiting arrangements, about danger, about possible scenarios where Hillsborough or some possible disaster could, in any case, and I mean in any case, happen, would that halt the process?
It would. Just to say very clearly that approval to build the stadium will not be given until all the statutory requirements have been met. That is in both the funding agreement and it's also in the contract, which requires, for example, statutory licensing and other approvals to be received, and advisory board body sign off before we can move to the next stage, which would be release of the construction notice, which would then enable the build to take place. And just to say it very clearly, and secondly, on the second point, that because there's a separate safety regime, that type of event, a disaster, would not occur because the stadium would not get a certificate to enable that capacity to be used.
Okay, well, I actually hear that clearly, and that satisfies me, because we were getting into all sorts of detail here today that I don't think would be possible at this stage for you to be able to give answers to. So, but maybe I'm hearing it differently. So just to be completely clear, and as people know, it's in my own constituency and I have huge concerns about safety, so I would want to be very satisfied. But you're saying that this programme has been carried out, this project has been carried out in accordance with managing successful programmes, is it?
Yes.
Are you satisfied that everything that is required to be in accordance with that is being followed, and or is there any part of this process which you feel is stepping outside that?
No, I have no information provided to me which suggests that we are out with the normal processes and structures that would take place. I would say, as I've said previously, that design work on emergency exiting is still being taken place and is still underway, and that work has not yet been completed or signed off.
Okay. And I mean, you were getting a lot of questions today, and I mean, everybody's entitled to put their questions, and that's fair enough. But there were questions about when this concern was raised. At what point what would need to be the case for a concern to be lifted out of the normal process and raised as a particular concern? Because I view all of these as concerns that are part of the process.
Yes.
That's why you have a process to address concerns.
Absolutely.
So what would need to be the case before something would be lifted out and brought to your attention?
Yeah, so for example, the Stadium Sponsor Board is an opportunity for the key bodies who are all involved in this programme. So, for example, at the Programme Sponsor Board, you would have representatives of the GAA, the IFA and Ulster Rugby. You would have the SROs for each, the senior and don't forget that each of the projects has a senior responsible officer who is accountable and responsible for those individual projects. And clearly there would have been an opportunity at any of those over 20 meetings which have taken place of the sponsor board to escalate particular concerns. It was raised as an ongoing issue that was being addressed, and that features, and you'll find it in the recorded in for example, my reports, where I would have reported that issues were still being addressed in relation to emergency exiting. There was an opportunity, if others had information there, to escalate it, and that didn't happen.
Okay, but the bottom line is that this will not proceed if there are any safety concerns which will endanger the public.
It will require all approvals to have been before if the building takes place and the construction, and indeed before funding. Before I would recommend to Dennis as the accounting officer, I wouldn't recommend either unless I was satisfied that those processes and approvals had been met.
Okay, thanks very much.
Councillor McCrae.
So, why did the department set up the STG?
The STG was set up as hopefully I will explain, as a multi-agency group, really to advise the department and give it specialist advice.
Just to be clear, why did the
regarding
department think it was necessary to set up an STG?
It was set up to provide additional specialist health and safety advice regarding aspects of the design and construction up to the commencement of the facilities at Casement, Windsor and at Kingspan at the three stadia.
How did the department intend to incorporate the advice from this STG into its thinking?
Normally there would have been representation at the well, just maybe I'm repeating myself. Is that the safety technical group would have included membership from Sport and Eyes, the overseeing body. It would have included membership from each of the.
I'm aware of the membership. The question I've asked is how does the department intend to be informed by the deliberations of the STG? But
it would be feeding through both through the department, through the programme director. There would also be liaison.
How would this
directly.
happen?
There would also be liaison directly with the governing bodies, who would be, and there would be separate, for example, separate STG meetings held for each of the individual projects. So that, for example, in Casement Park, you would have an STG meeting.
Did the department decide to put its own representative on the STG?
This would have been a means of liaison and engagement with
Did the department appoint its own representative on the STG?
There would have been a departmental representative present at the STG.
And do you know who that person was?
It would normally have been the programme architect, would normally be the representation from DECAL, normally.
So, would it have been a surprise to you that the departmental representative stopped going?
I think this refers to the chair's earlier question, and I answered that by saying that that my understanding is that engagement continues as the design work continues. That's still an ongoing process, and I think I've explained that liaison and engagement. And can I just say that? And it's back to the earlier point, and I hope you won't mind me repeating it too, that it comes to a dispute of facts. I mean, clearly that's something that I would like the investigation to establish those facts and come to a conclusion.
When was the issue of the emergency exit plan or concern, when was that first identified as a potential issue?
I think that's been asked to me earlier on.
Would you mind if I ask you the question, because I would like a specific date?
I do not have a specific date, because my understanding is that this is an ongoing development process when health and safety issues, and in particular emergency exiting, would be discussed as part of the ongoing design development process. Certainly, we can review the minutes to see if there's a formal date in any of the minutes.
Would it have been given in the outline business case in 2010 on pages 51 and 52?
Clearly, at an early stage, this was previously recognised, I think. Clearly, health and safety was identified as an emergency exiting, was identified as an issue that would have to be addressed. This should be no surprise to anybody involved in a major capital project of this nature, that emergency exiting would have been obviously an issue that would have to be addressed. And I think, from my memory of the wording of that's precisely so. It shouldn't be a surprise if I could suggest that that was raised as an issue that needed to be addressed.
Okay, so that was raised. Do you have a chronological list of the times when Sport NI raised the emergency exit issues with the department?
It was not, I think, again, in response to the previous question, we've had over 20 meetings of the Stadia Programme Board, at which I think it's fair to say SNI has been at the vast majority, if not all. I'd need to check the records. They've been at all of those over 20 meetings. There would have been an opportunity at any of those meetings to raise the issue of...
Do you have a chronological list of the times when Sport NI raised the matter of the emergency exiting scheme with the department?
I do not have before me a chronological list.
Could you produce such a list?
I could go through the minutes of meeting. I think you have probably them, but to be helpful and cooperative with the committee, we could go through the lists of meetings where that issue might have been raised, and I'm happy to do so.
Given that, well, I would accept that I would like to see that list. Could you explain to me, there's an email from Carl Southern, decalni.gov.uk on the 9th of October 2013 at 9:43. It says in this, if you require additional STG into the workshop, please feel free to invite representation. However, we would stress the aims to close out this activity as a matter of considerable urgency given the imminent return of the tenders at the end of the month. The issues that it wishes to close out are exiting strategy, internal and external, uncovered seating, final agreement of exit widths, and it does say key areas to reach a consensus position, brackets, those most contentious from the STG perspective, as discussed to date, will be. There is an email trail, October 2013, from the department, and this issue about not having finalised the design, or we're still in design, or we haven't got whatever, this email, unless I'm mistaken, says we wish to close it out We wish to close it out at the end of the month. What does that mean?
I really am not in a position to comment on that email. That will be a matter, no doubt, that will be raised in either the investigation or the independent inquiry, and I'm not in a position to comment on that.
This is from a person that is in the Department of Culture, Arts and Leisure. In fact, it is the architect, the programme architect, and I think if you said to me earlier that the person that you would have thought might have been on the STG might have been the architect. So, were you aware of this information, that the programme architect was trying to close out the emergency exiting strategy in October 2013?
I think, again, Chair, I'll have to say that that's a matter that will be considered in the independent investigation and inquiry.
Can I ask you in the same way that the Chair asked you? This is not a department. This is a direct question to you as the senior responsible officer. Were you aware that the departmental architect said on October 2013, we wish to close out these issues as a matter of considerable urgency given the imminent return of tenders? Were you personally aware of that information?
I would need to know to answer that, and I do want to be as helpful and open as cooperative. I really don't understand what the term close out would mean. I would need, and this is where, Chair, I think it's really important that people are given the opportunity to explain. If I comment, I mean, he might have, the individual concerned may have a different interpretation. So I really don't want to get into speculation of what was meant. So this is really a matter that I don't think...
Sorry, I just think for clarity, I mean, again, I'm coming to this with no... This is not, you know, the terminology would need to be, as Cynthia says, you need to ask the people who wrote that. But close out does not mean, I think that the close out here sounds to me as if it's been presented as, you know, ignore or get rid of. Close out is a common term I've heard in construction circles where the people talk about closing out issues as in dealing with issues, as in bringing them to completion. So that, I would not necessarily, picking that up with no baggage, I would not necessarily read that as close out in that close out or ignore. So I just think it's important that we get that clear. If that's what we're asking the question, if the question is, you know, were you aware that somebody had said that they wanted to ignore some issues, that's a different question from were you aware that somebody had written an email saying that...
Well, let me say this in a way that you understand, because we've had a discussion before whenever you did not provide information to the committee in a timely fashion. I believe that you are trying to confuse the issue. We have a paper trail here which the department should have been aware of. It's on departmental emails from departmental representatives. And I am asking you direct questions about what you know. It is not a surprise to you about what you come to this committee to discuss. Right? You have been briefed, you know what it's about, and we are not getting answers. I will ask you, so I'm just putting it on the record, that when you get asked a direct question, it's because we want a direct answer. So let me ask you one last question, a direct question, please.
Just before you actually ask the question, the paper to which Mr McRae is referring is one that was given to us by Mr Scott at a previous meeting, along with a lot of other papers, a couple of hundred pages. Those were then, as I understand it, provided to the department. So the department has had ample opportunity to read them and assess them. So it's not just making the point, it wouldn't be a surprise today that Mr Southern put that into a departmental email. That's all I was going to say. Right, Mr McRae.
Thank you, Chair. So, let me just, having made my point on that we do expect you to be on top of these things and we do expect answers collectively. Can I ask you if at any time the department was aware of a plan by the GAA to purchase houses to alleviate the emergency exit scheme?
I was aware that there were ongoing discussions in relation to emergency exiting, that a number of options were being explored and a number of alternatives were being explored, that those discussions were still ongoing and are indeed still ongoing as the design work is underway.
So if I ask the question specifically, were you aware of a plan to purchase housing to alleviate the emergency exiting situation?
I was aware that there were a number of options being discussed. The technical details would not be for me to consider. I understood that a number of options were being explored. This is part of the ongoing discussions that were taking place.
So there are a number of options. Was one of the options a plan to purchase housing to enhance the emergency exiting scheme?
I am not familiar with the details of the technical discussions that were taking place.
So nobody in the department is aware of any plan to purchase housing?
I am not saying that. I'm saying that I personally was not aware that I rely on technical advisors to undertake those consultations and debates and discussions as appropriate to seek agreement and to take the process forward. I'm not involved in detailed design work looking at emergency exiting.
Okay.
Are you aware of any minutes from Sport NI where Sport NI declared their concern about the emergency exiting scheme and the safety arrangements?
Well, from sitting here last week, you brought to the committee's attention, I think, if I recall, that you had got from a website one of the Sport NI committee board meetings, minutes of those board meetings, and I think you read me from that board meeting a discussion that had taken place in 2012.
So you're aware of those minutes?
You brought them to my attention last week.
Are those minutes that I brought to your attention? Actually, I think it might have been Mr. Humphreys, but maybe I did it too. Are you aware of? Are those minutes correct?
Could I just explain? Maybe it would be helpful so that people can understand what minutes you're referring to. I think the reference there that you're giving is to minutes of a meeting on the 23rd of June. These are board minutes of the Sport NI board. These minutes, this was not brought to my attention. I did not attend the board meeting, so I cannot comment on the board meeting or the board discussion.
Are you surprised that Sport NI in their minutes discuss how they have on their risk registers reputational risk regarding the emergency exiting scheme?
I understand that it was on the risk register for a while, and then it was subsequently taken off the risk register as an ongoing issue that was being discussed.
So I'll conclude now with a statement that says, I believe that there has been flagrant disregard for safety technical group information that has been presented repeatedly, and that the department have not acted responsibly in dealing with these issues. I would like to ask you, given that you are a senior responsible officer, do you think it is right that you should be concerned about the single most important issue about whether this project goes ahead or not?
I just say for the record too that I would not accept the statement that you made in terms of the department ignoring the advice of the safety technical group. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
So the second point is, given that the nub of this project now comes down to an emergency exit scheme that is mentioned repeatedly through the documentation, that it is not easy to get a new stadium in an old site, particularly a constrained site, that the emergency exiting scheme would have been important. Do you, as the senior responsible officer, not think that you should have been further across the subject than you appear to be?
I would not accept that I'm not across the subject. And clearly, if Sport and I had issues, I would not expect to be advised of issues from receiving copies of minutes of board meetings, I would expect that if there were significant concerns, that they would be raised formally. And there were plenty of occasions, as I've indicated. For example, there were over 20 meetings of the programme sponsor board, most of which I believe and understand were attended by Sport NI, who could have made in that very appropriate forum, if they had any concerns and wished to escalate the issue of emergency exiting, they could have done so at that forum.
And if any information had come to you in that regard, in terms of you escalating, would you have written to the Permanent Secretary to inform the Permanent Secretary of concerns that have been raised to you?
The Permanent Secretary is also very involved in this whole process, and indeed would normally attend meetings of the programme board, so would be very familiar with issues that have been raised, both from that and also from attendance of the programme sponsor board, which
But
would be
if
the
information
levels.
was brought to your attention, because we're talking here about process and escalation, if information is brought to your attention, would you have escalated that to the Permanent Secretary in writing?
I would have asked if there was an issue that was going to impact clearly on the delivery of the programme, I would clearly have been raised as in accordance with the normal escalation processes. I did record in notes to the programme board, and these are on record, that emergency exiting was an issue that was still under development, and that was made clear in a number of reports to the programme board.
Did you at any time write or email or communicate formally with the Permanent Secretary concerns that have been brought to you about emergency exiting schemes?
Emergency exiting, my understanding was that emergency exiting was part of an ongoing discussion. I've already explained that in a capital programme of this nature, development is an ongoing process, and it's a process. There were ongoing discussions on emergency exiting.
Did you at
Clearly,
any time write to the Permanent Secretary explaining the situation? It's just in writing. I accept there were ongoing discussions. My question is, did you at any time write by email or letter to the Permanent Secretary informing him of concerns that had been brought to your attention about the emergency exiting scheme?
I would put it that there were. I have not written I have not written other than in my reports to the programme board, in which I do an update report on each of the on the programme, and I draw attention to issues. One of the issues that I drew attention, and I have been drawn attention to, in terms of ongoing discussions, is in terms of emergency exiting. And it's clearly also recorded on the risk register for the programme in terms of an issue. Clearly, those discussions have not.
So I'll finish because we've gone on long enough. But I just want to put it on the record. I want to give you the opportunity to say yes or no. Are you telling me on the record that at no time were you approached by Sports NI about their concern about the emergency exiting scheme for Casement Park, and that you did not write to the Permanent Secretary about those issues?
And I would like to be very clear that there were ongoing discussions, and clearly there were iterations, and clearly people were having discussions, debates. They were trying to find solutions to these issues. There were ongoing discussions at a range of levels, providing advice. Those discussions have not been completed because the design work has not been completed.
And I will note that you have not answered this question, and I will finish on this point because it is clear that I'm not going to get an answer, but I will be asking the Chair to write to you specifically about those issues.
William Humphrey.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, and thank you very much for your evidence. As set out in your presentation, Cynthia, you talked about the best practice within the department and the processes, the practices and the procedures within DCAL, and it sounds like bodies as part of your evidence this morning. Why then is it necessary, and I quote, for you to be putting appropriate governance in place? Those procedures and practices and processes are in place. Why do you have to put in appropriate governance?
It's very clear that in a major programme like this, and as I've been describing, I think, throughout my evidence this morning, under the programme that we're using and the methodology that we're using to run this programme, which is managing successful programmes, there's a whole series of governance arrangements that are put in place to manage a major capital programme. I've described those arrangements that have been put in place. They follow the guidance that we get in terms of best practice, in terms of managing major capital programmes, and those are the structures, the arrangements, the governance, the methods for ensuring that at key milestones that appropriate documentation and assurances and documentary evidence is obtained and available to support all those decisions.
So you also said, in terms of the process is no different from other major capital projects. It is, except that there are 3 now major investigations around this process. And I think that's something which sets it aside from all of the others that you may have had in your mind as being other projects. You also said that the GA is moving towards a consultation process on the stadium. Now, in the evidence you gave, you said that the design team had started its work before and then formally started its work, I think, said in September 2012. There was then an application in July 2013 and approval in December 2013. Is that correct?
Yes, the consultant was appointed in September 2012.
Yeah.
That's Mott MacDonald's. The planning application was submitted in July 2013 and approval granted in December of 2013, yes.
Okay. And then we moved to a judicial review. So you also said that the processes are still ongoing, and you also mentioned that there was a revised business case being drawn up.
No. What I did say was that in circumstances, and it's quite clearly laid out in the approvals processes, if, for example, costs escalate or there's some other significant change to the basis on which the original and final business case were drawn up, there would be a need to revisit it, to revisit. I'm saying, I didn't say that we were doing it, but I was saying that the normal process would be that if there were significant divergences, and as I'm sure you'll appreciate, there's sometimes, for example, quite a while has elapsed between approval of the final business case, so it's always prudent to make sure that the parameters in which the business case were approved are still applicable.
But I'm asking that, making that point in the context of you having said that the GA is moving to a new consultation process. That indicates a change as far as I see it. And you also mentioned then, in terms of there are 2 processes in relation to any development such as this, design and build, and we haven't completed the design process. Yeah? £7 million nearly of taxpayers' money spent, and we haven't concluded the design process. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, because those design, that does also include, I should point out, I presume that £7 million includes the judicial review and the cost to the taxpayer of the judicial review. Does it?
Can I just maybe provide a figure of expenditure data, and I suppose this is in common with all major capital projects. costs associated with developing the project in terms of establishing the appropriate structures, such as we've been discussing throughout this morning, appointment of the design teams, for example, appointment of the business case consultants. They have been incurred to date on the Casement Park project, and as of the end of March, the total spend on the project was approximately 5.6 is the absolute precise figure.
That included judicial review?
And that would have included, if I could just describe the cost, that would have included things like design team costs, legal costs, statutory fees, dramatic, so all the various processes would have been included in those
We're not out of the starting blocks.
But could again just say that my technical advice, and I rely on technical advice, is that in a £62.5 million plus the £15 million that the GAA is contributing. So in a major capital project of this type, and I anticipating your question, I checked this out with my technical advisors who advised me that in a project, and given the scale of this nature, that would not be unusual in the pre-construction stage to have incurred that scale and that proportion of costs to date. And that is my technical advice.
But what has the taxpayer got for the amount that you've just said in real terms?
Well,
because you, as I've said earlier, you've talked about the design isn't completed. We've had a judicial review around these issues, and now the GA is moving to a new consultation process. What have you got for the £5 million odd pounds?
As I said, for to deliver a major capital programme, and this is a major capital programme which is going to produce significant benefits to the area in line with the original business case, you need to start design work in order to achieve the build. It is not unusual in these types of capital projects to have spent that proportion of money in the pre-construction costs. That would not be out of keeping, and my technical advisors, I will rely on my technical advisors to keep me right, but they have advised that that would not be out of kilter with normal practice in a major capital.
I have to say, if having started the work before September 2012, and if officially started, if that's where we can put it, in September 2012, to be sitting in the mouth of June 2015, we are where we are around this project. If this was the private sector, heads would roll, I have to say. In relation to DECAL set up the Safety Technical Group. Yeah. Why then, and I note that you don't agree with this point, but I'll ask the question anyway. It would seem to me, when I asked the question last week, referring to the minutes on the 23rd of June 2014, and the advice that was given to the Sport NI board by Mr Scott, the chair of the Safety Technical Group, there were a range of issues, and according to your answers last week, these would have been ultimately conveyed through to Mr Muskelly. Did Mr Muskelly advise you of these minutes?
I would not expect Mr Muskelly to be reading the minutes of DECAL of Sport NI board meetings.
Right. Well, can I just then perhaps say that whenever the Minister was here with the two of you last week, and I asked this question, it eventually came through that Mr Muskelly, initially the answer was Mr Devitt, then it came through that Mr Muskelly is the responsible person. I would have thought, in the situation in which we find ourselves, that Mr Muskelly should be reading minutes such as this, because the Safety Technical Group is there to provide the information of the nature in which this whole the basis of this investigation and the other investigations are around, that perhaps he should have been reading those minutes. And not only should he be reading those minutes, Ms Smith, he should have been briefing you and your colleague, the Permanent Secretary, around those minutes.
Can I say again that the method of communicating issues to the department shouldn't be relying on the department reading minutes of board meetings. I would expect if an issue was of significant purport that it would have been raised in another venue, and I've already described in response to, I've suggested in response to an earlier question, an appropriate opportunity. 20 such opportunities at least, which would have been available at the programme sponsor board if they would have been taken up. But I think we're talking now about a different process in terms of our sponsorship of ALBs and what mechanisms do we use in order to assure ourselves in terms of for example, what's of governance issues and finance, etc., in an arm's length body. And clearly we have mechanisms where, for example, we have regular accountability meetings between the senior sponsor in the department and the arm's length body. That happens for under our governance provisions with all our arm's length bodies. That was a point I wanted to make.
Can I just go back a week to the answer? When I asked this question, the answer, and you're now saying that you don't expect Mr. Miskelly to read the Sport NI minutes. The answer that you gave, sir, as Permanent Secretary of this department. Yeah. If significant issues arise in the minutes, there are two issues. First, is the issues identified mean that they go to the sponsorship team? They escalate them to the senior management team. I would suggest that the evidence that Mr. Scott gave to the Sport NI board as chair of the Safety Technical Committee was crucial. And it's very clear from the answer that you have now given, Cynthia, that was not escalated. So which is it?
I think there's a big...
Is it what we've just one moment?
Sorry, yeah.
Is it what we just heard from Cynthia Smith that she doesn't expect him to read them, or is it what you said last week?
I think there's two. I think that there's a number of issues are being confused in all of that. Okay. The first thing is there is a normal process in terms of sponsorship of NDPBs that minutes are sent in of the board meetings are sent into the sponsorship team. That is not the Stadia team. That is a sponsorship team that is responsible for looking after, for ensuring that the issues that arise in the non-departmental public bodies or the relevant arm's length body are being addressed right across the board, not one issue. Then that is one mechanism. And if that sponsorship team identifies something in the board that they feel is not being dealt with properly, whatever that issue is, then it is quite right that they would escalate that through the normal processes in the department. Okay. There is a separate issue here.
Can I just stop you there, if you don't mind? Was it escalated?
No, it wasn't.
Right.
That I'm aware of.
Right.
Well, sorry. Well, so, maybe in my time, but then. But sorry. To be fair. Sorry, I'm answering that. I'm only saying in my time.
Right.
I can't go.
And I think, to be fair, for the record, Ms. Smith nodded her head in agreement with what you said. Yeah, so it wasn't escalated to her level either.
Yeah, and to be fair, when you look at those minutes as well, again, if those are the minutes we're referring to, I'd be interested to see just, what is it exactly that we're saying there in those minutes that implies that this was not being looked at.
Well, having anticipated the answers that I've got, can I then move on then? Because it says, I then asked the question, does the Chief Executive of Sport NI hold regular accountability meetings with senior officials in DCAL? And if so, who are those officials? Cynthia's reply was, the normal practice for Sport NI, as with any arm's length body, is to hold regular accountability meetings and sign biannual assurance statements. So therefore, let me ask you, over and above the advice which Mr. Scott gave to the Sport NI board, which was not escalated to either of your levels, so one assumes was ignored, contrary to what the evidence we heard earlier, did the leadership of Sport NI and their meetings, their accountability meetings with senior civil servants, i.e. either of you or Mr. McMahon, your predecessor, did Sport NI raise these issues in terms of escalation with either of you or your predecessor?
Well, not with me, I can't. I can't talk for
All I can say is I'm not aware through the accountability meetings, and as you say, those take part with the senior sponsor in the department, and those normally take place, as we said, with the Chief Executive of Sport and I and directors to discuss, and the sort of issues, just to give you a flavour of the sort of issues that would normally be discussed at those accountability meetings would be things like performance against, business plan performance against targets, and financial matters, and issues of those sort. And I am not aware that the stadium programme featured in those discussions.
So we've established now that Mr. Muskelly did not escalate, because that's who you say is the person responsible. The minutes of the board meeting, which you don't believe he should be reading at that level. Then we also didn't have it directly raised by the senior officials, chief executive or whoever in Sport NI. So I have to conclude, having listened to what you've said, Cynthia, very carefully earlier, and taken note of what you've said, I have to conclude that the Safety Technical Group advice that was articulated at the Sport NI board, and the failure then, according to the evidence that you have given us today, of the CEO or other senior officials in Sport NI to articulate that at that level. The advice that Mr. Scott gave was not taken up by the or conveyed to your department by Sport NI. That's what I have to conclude, and therefore advice was either ignored or not passed on. That's what I conclude from that. Now, finally then, I have to say that I'm in a position that the more we hear here in terms of evidence, I am beginning to wonder, having listened to what has been said in the last 2 weeks, the evidence from the Minister, who's the political lead in the department, and both yourselves respectively, as the civil service lead in the department, I am beginning to wonder, had we not had the whistleblowing and the evidence from Mr. Scott, exactly where this whole process and this project would now be in terms of health and safety, and particularly around the issue of emergency exiting. I am increasingly concerned that what I'm reading and failing to hear answered at this committee. Thank you very much, Chairman.
And just in comment to that, just to be sure, just to repeat the point again, that there's a separate safety certification process which would require a safety certificate before the stadia could be, and just to
absolutely, but we could end up, as we've said, where you build a 38,000 stadium and only allow 20,000 people into it. That would be a scandal if that happened, but it could have happened the way things were going.
Thanks very much, Chair. There's a screen flashing up in front of me here saying my battery's very low. I know the feeling of a machine.
Well, if you want to stop it.
Anyway, thanks very much for coming this morning. And been very, I think you've been well and truly put through the middle here today with questions. And I'm trying not to repeat them. But so where I am in understanding the process so far, what you've been trying to explain, and I'm going on around the remit of the committee's inquiry, which I want to read out. The certification around that is to ascertain whether appropriate consideration was given to plans for emergency exiting during the design process for the redevelopment Casement Park Stadium. So, we've got 2 key stages. We've heard about the design and we've heard about the build. We've heard about the design team still under discussions around, I suppose, one of the main aspects to it was the safety exit of Casement. And we also heard about that there has been no approval to build to date, and also the construction notice hasn't been released. And then we've heard questions about the Safety Tech Group and communications between the group and the department and individuals within the department, etc. So what I'm looking to see, or maybe hear your view on, and we talked about, I think Mr. Hushing raised it way at the beginning of the meeting, was about duplication in an investigation. Do you see this as a hindrance of any kind, this committee's inquiry, to the independent inquiry and to the one that's going on in Sport NI?
I see as I've explained maybe earlier, I think there are certain issues which it would not be appropriate to discuss. And the reason why is because there's an ongoing live investigation, independent investigation. It's taking place totally separate from this department. It's been initially scoped by the head of audit in DCAL and DE. They will report independently to the Department of Finance and Personnel. They will decide then, independently from us, how to take that matter forward. And I think it's very important to be clear that that's been done under procedures which are aligned to whistleblowing procedures. It's very important that people are allowed to give evidence, establish the facts, and that we do not cut across, prejudice or preempt anything that might be subject to that investigation. And it's really important that those processes are allowed to take place and that we don't preempt the outcomes or in any way prejudice. And this let's be clear, this is both to safeguard the interests of those who raise those concerns, and just to put on record that I very much welcome individuals coming forward and raising concerns in the way that Mr. Scott felt he had to do. I mean, people should feel free to raise those concerns. Equally well, they need to be assured that they are able to do so in a way that supports them and also supports and protects both them and other people who might be involved in any investigations that are taking place. And it's really important that is well understood.
Yeah, okay. So, for the work on the emergency exit strategy has not yet been completed, but we spoke then about the statutory bodies and how they sign off on different things like building control regulations for planning and how from outline plan permission in and full plan permission and what changes take place and what extra drawings you have to put in from architects and all of that. Is the statutory body sign off is the only one that's outstanding to do with the emergency exit, or is there others?
There would be there'd be a whole range in the normal building contract. There would be a whole range of approvals and processes that would need to be complied with. And what we would do before any construction notice would be released, we'd go through each of those to ensure that they'd all been complied with and met. And in this particular contract, indeed, we've gone further, and we haven't just said meet statutory approvals and licensing requirements, but also we've included advisory body sign-off, and clearly advisory body sign-off would include the safety technical group. So, approval to release the construction notice is not going to take place until the STG is content.
Okay. So, do you know the minutes of the meeting with the STG? Have they? I think I asked this actually of Mr. Scott when he came in. But I'll repeat it again because from memory I'm not sure. The minutes of the STG, and do they go to the board and get passed, or are they just taken as read?
I think that's one of the issues, and again, I don't want to preempt any conclusions from any of the various processes that are underway here, but clearly there have been issues of communication, I think, throughout this process, and I think it would be really helpful moving forward if there were clear protocols established and the normal processes in place to ensure that meetings take place, efficiently and effectively, including, mechanisms for clearing minutes and for having agenda for meetings, the normal things that you would expect in meetings. And in response to that, there had been discussions with Sport NI since December, looking at how could we make that more effective. And one of the mechanisms that we'd suggested would be and have proposed is that if the department provides the administrative support, it would facilitate that process and make it work more effectively. But I do think also that, and again, not to prejudice the outcome of any investigations or inquiries, I think it would be helpful if there were clear protocols for engagement of the group with the various stakeholders. I think it would be really, really helpful and add an additional clarity to that.
Okay, so there was 3 STGs set up for the stadium projects.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Yeah. Was there any difference between the handling of the group, like a Kingspan Stadium or to Casement?
It's actually well, there seemed to be there is one STG, but the membership varies because they have separate. Core membership is the same for each of the 3 projects, but there are some individuals who are different depending on, for example, it might be a different person who would go along representing, say, the emergency services, depending on how they're structured and organised. So it might be a different person for Kingspan at Ravenhill than it is for, say, Casement in West Belfast. So that would reflect the broad sort of structure of the membership, and the core membership would remain the same. And yes, there was one for each of the three projects. One of the areas that we'd like to have considered in terms of the project assessment review is to look at those processes, so somebody independently can verify, was appropriate stages reached, coming to certain decisions. So that's one of the things that I think, and was there similar treatment across the 3 projects, which I think would be an important point to establish too.
Okay, so we've established then that one of the reasons why an approval to build hasn't been rubber stamped at the minute is because there's issues around, for example, the emergency exit scheme. And as far as I'm aware, from what I've heard, a couple of presentations is that the Belfast City Council certificate that has to be issued, the safety certificate, there's a process there that runs coincide from the planning application, from discussions right through, from the design team, and right through before the approval to build, that they come to some form of even a verbal agreement at meetings to say, yes, this would be acceptable and no, not, and that's how negotiations, not negotiations, but how guidance is given.
And just to maybe, and again, it might be helpful for the committee to understand that, I mean, as you rightly say, there's a separate statutory process for giving certification that a ground can't be used, a stadia can't be used unless it has a safety certificate. And that normally is only given quite close to the event. So
well,
it's
that's
after
the point I was going to make, Cynthia, because like I wanted someone to be able to explain to me like a safety certificate, and we know the importance around it, and it's been raised here a few times. Could only be given to a stadium that's ready to open within a week. Or maybe 2 weeks before opening. How can that happen? Is that because guarantees have been given and guidance has been given right through a process?
Yes, and also because the 2 key parts in terms of giving a safety certificate. One obviously is in terms of is the design capable of?
I can't hear you. Sorry. Is
the design capable of enabling the health and safety requirements to be met? And then clearly another important aspect of issuing the safety certificate from the District Council under the separate statutory process is, for example, is the event management plan in place? Now the event management plan is drawn up. And that will be used as part of the assurance, if you like, in terms of being able to issue a safety certificate, and that is only done very, very, very much just prior to the use of the stadium. So, for example, in the case of Kingspan Stadium, I recall that the safety certificate, and I think it was for 18,000, just over 18,000, was issued, I think within weeks, I think, of the stadia opening.
Okay, just another question as well. You spoke about taking advice from people, and you very much welcome advice from specialists like Mr. Scott and their opinions. Because the process is still ongoing, would opinions still come to play now that there's an investigation going on? Or?
Clearly, maybe I'll ask, because the point I do want to make is that clearly the design process is still ongoing. But I just want to maybe bring in Dennis,
Yeah.
because I think Dennis referred last week to a meeting that he
Yes.
has arranged with
that's
the
a-
STG.
I mean, that's a good example because the Minister had asked that I would meet with the STG to hear their concerns firsthand. And one of the things that I was very sensitive to, even in terms of contacting Mr Scott to arrange that, is just the need to make sure that I wasn't, getting into a conversation. Sorry. Getting into a
Claire,
conversation.
can I just say, there's tweets and everything coming from this meeting, and I don't know, there's people able to tweet and their fingers are not even near their phone, but I'm just, it's very distracting.
Tweet at all and doesn't even read anything.
Or me.
I know nothing about it, but if somebody is, please refrain.
I think the mystery might be that this has been broadcast live as part of the normal issues, and no doubt the public are looking in at us, and maybe some people are tweeting on that basis.
Well, if that's the case, then Mr. Basil McRae, yours has been hacked.
Right.
You're quite- Sorry, I'd rather go back to the question.
Sorry.
Is there any problem
just,
with people
please,
looking at
just a
this
minute,
on
just a
TV
minute,
and
just a moment.
making a comment?
Excuse me. I want to keep a focus on what is an important issue. No side issues. Continue with the question.
Apologies, sorry. The issue was, well, yes, sorry, we were talking about the meeting with the STG, and I suppose it was just to give an example of that, because I was very aware in terms of talking to Mr Scott, and I'd mentioned that I'd spoken to Mr Scott twice the last time we were here, and it was very important, for example, we actually had a very good conversation, and a very short one, but in the sense of I was very aware of not wanting to get into some of the issues around the investigation for Mr Scott's benefit and for the others. So we've been very sensitive to that, and I waited. One of the things that I was waiting for was, in a sense, the auditor to come back and just say, look, we've gone so far in the process that now is as appropriate time as any to meet with the STG. So that meeting will be going ahead, and we've contacted Mr Scott to see if we can get some dates where the group can be pulled together. But I think, to answer your question in very straightforward terms, we will obviously want to bring that information in. We will want to do it on a formal basis, and we'll want to get to that point when we can start doing that as soon as possible. We just don't want to do it in a way which doesn't give people the opportunity to. We don't want to do it in a way that cuts across the investigation, so that maybe it prejudices that. So it's nothing more than that. But absolutely, that process will continue. We will be engaging with STG. I would want to see, one of the things I would want to see come out of this, I think, as Cynthia has referred to earlier, is a very clear protocol in place, so that everybody is satisfied. That isn't to say that going forward there won't be disagreements or challenges, that's absolutely appropriate. We want critical friends involved in this process. But they need to feel that the protocols need to be set up in such a way that they feel that they're able to get their point across. From our point of view, as the SRO and as the accounting officer, we need to be satisfied that we're hearing what we need to hear, and that's being built into the process before we can sign off.
Yeah, and I think for us as a committee, we need to be hearing what we need to hear on health and safety.
Yeah.
They're not
Yes.
We're no experts on it, but when issues have been raised, and it's good that you're able to come before this committee, so questions can be put forward and answered as honestly as possible. So I thank you for coming here this morning for that.
Dominic
Thanks,
Bradley,
Chair.
please.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon. It's been a long morning. You said earlier on, Ms Smith, that you are to some extent curtailed in what you can say in this particular forum, that you were wary of prejudicing the DFP inquiry. And therefore,
Is it a DFP inquiry, or is it an inquiry being conducted by DCAL, bringing somebody in?
No, what it is we've asked the head of internal audit to do an initial scoping exercise in consultation with Mr Scott, and then to bring the outcome of that to DFP, so that it'll not go near DCAL, and they will then consider the next steps in the process.
Okay.
And the point I was making again was I was just really concerned that we don't prejudice or preempt that outcome or the ability to establish the facts. And I say the motive in all of this is to ensure that the rights and interests both of the individual who's raising the concerns and others who might be involved are protected and acknowledged, I think, too.
So you're basically telling us that you can't give this committee inquiry a full picture of what has transpired because you're curtailed in certain areas?
No, it's only if it relates to issues that, issues that would be concerning Mr Scott's bullying and harassment allegations, which would involve other people. So we don't want to get into a he said, she said situation without having an opportunity to clearly establish the facts, and then from that basis then we can go forward. But I think to go on any other basis I think wouldn't support the process that I think that we're all trying to get to, which is to establish the facts.
And I think just to add to that, to be clear, anything that's factual, stated, put on paper, anything that's absolutely clear. That would come to the inquiry, no problem at all with that. I suppose the only issue, as Cynthia's talking about, is areas where there might be potential dispute. Because, for example, if there was another investigation process going on a totally separate issue, and I or somebody else disagreed with the person raising the allegations at a certain point, would it be appropriate for me as a permanent secretary to turn around and start to challenge those issues, in a public forum without having the person having a proper opportunity to get those points across, and for others to have responded? That's really all we're saying.
You said earlier on, Ms Smith, that the STG was more or less the same for the three projects, with one or two individual differences here and there.
Yes, the same.
Can I ask you, was the department represented on the STG for Ravenhill during the course of the design, construction and completion of that project?
My understanding that was that the representation was the same. There was a means of liaising. Well, I just need to be careful now, because some of Ravenhill, obviously the STG was appointed at the end of 2012, and the Stadia project, remember, didn't rest. Prior to this, it was in Sport NI. So just to remember that the programme, responsibility for the programme at one stage rested in Sport NI rather than in the department.
Yeah, but you said earlier on that the STG was the same for, more or less the same for all three projects. Now what I'm asking you is, did the department remain engaged for the full course planning, design and completion of the Ravenhill Kingspan Stadium?
Certainly my understanding was that the broadly the same process would have been in operation in terms of engagement, the advice coming through to the department to inform the
Does that mean yes? Yes.
Well, my understanding, but can I just say that clearly there are different issues that arise in the three projects. There's site-specific
Yeah, but this is quite a simple question.
Yes.
Did the department's official remain engaged with the Kingspan Ravenhill Stadium throughout the course of its design, build and completion?
My understanding was that it was. Yes.
Okay. Why then did the departmental representative withdraw from the STG for casement?
And that is one of the questions I really can't answer, because I do not have. I mean, earlier on it was quoted one email. I think, again, back to this point about we need to give the individuals involved the opportunity to say what they meant, what was exchanged, what was said, and I'm really not in a position to comment on that.
And the
So we
gentleman
have to
concerned
wait
will be here. It'll be with us in a few weeks' time, hopefully.
Right.
The gentleman concerned will be with us in a few weeks' time.
The question is, will he answer the questions? But anyway, we'll move on. During the course of your evidence this morning, Ms Smith, you said that there were ongoing discussions of health and safety issues. That was, almost day-to-day concern, regarding Casement Park, and that included the emergency exiting, right? And that those concerns were then, if my understanding of what you said is correct, that they were then sort of channeled into the design team to be dealt with, rectified, or whatever. Did the department have any checks or safeguards in place to ensure that those health safety matters, especially the ones relating to the emergency exiting, that they were in fact being addressed by the design team?
Well, as I say, ultimately, as I say, the check and balance would be that no construction notice would be released unless the STG was content with the proposals, and that's what happened to say in the other two. So that's the ultimate sanction, was that the agreement would have to have been given of the STG to the proposals before the building work through the release of the construction notice would take place.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that, but particularly in relation to these issues, one would think that the department would want some sort of reassurance that there was ongoing attention being paid to them and that they were being addressed through the design. I mean, if I were in a senior position in the department, I think I would want to know that.
Yes. Yes.
Did the department want to know that, and if so, how did it find out the answer?
Well, clearly there would have been ongoing liaison both between the department and the various the design groups and the individual projects. And just to be clear, too, in all these structures, for example, we have project boards for each of the projects. They have been meeting regularly, and there are steering groups. So all of these boards and structures will be considering these issues. There'll be direct liaison with the design teams individually on the individual projects. So it's a whole iterative process in terms of developing the design.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
So just, Oliver will come in just before he does. You mentioned in earlier stage about 3 SROs, one for each project.
Yes.
And you're the main SRO, and then there's 3 SROs. Who are they?
Yes, there are 3 SROs. I'm the program SRO. As
Right,
I've
okay.
explained. So there's a program SRO. Overall responsibility. My role is to ensure that the program achieves its objectives and delivers the benefits. There then are, for each of the 3 projects, SRO. So for Casement Park, it would be Tom Daly.
Okay.
For
So
Kingspan.
it's somebody from the organisation.
Yes.
That's
Kingspan.
fine. That's what I was just trying to get clear.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and then it'd be Jim Shaw, presumably from the IFA.
It's Patrick Nelson.
Patrick Nelson,
And it's Shane Logan for Ulster Rugby.
Okay, thank you. Oliver?
It's for the governing bodies, yes. Yeah.
That's grand.
Why are you patient, Cynthia? Tell me this here, the STG, have I got that right? Who's the president? Is it still there?
Yes.
Who's the chair of it?
Paul Scott is the chair, and this is one of the points that we hopefully have clarified and at the previous time that we were in front of the committee here, is that just to make it absolutely clear that Paul Scott remains the chair, and I know that Dennis had an opportunity just to clarify that, I think, in conversation with him as well. He remains the chair. There was a proposal, and just to be very clear to the committee, there were discussions from December last year in terms of how we could improve effectiveness and efficiency of operation of the STG. Just mindful of this point as well about, there's quite an administrative task involved, as you can imagine, in terms of, setting up meetings, getting minutes agreed, getting papers, getting agenda items. So what we offered to do was that the department would assist through the providing administrative support, and we also proposed that in order to relieve of some of the, and it's an onerous task being a chairperson of a committee, so to relieve you of that task and enable your technical and professional input to be made, the proposal was that the department then would chair. But this was a proposal. Mr. Scott remains the chair of the STG. The next meeting of the STG will be looking at that proposal and looking at and one of the issues was that there were no clear terms of reference, of course, so those were issued with a view to discussion at the next meeting of the STG.
So Mr. Scott remains at this time chair.
He is absolutely the chair.
He's never been replaced.
No.
With all the concerns that have been raised by the chair of the STG at sponsor board meetings, were they raised? Was there many concerns raised by the chair?
At sponsor board meetings by the chair of
The STG?
the chair of the STG didn't attend sponsor board meeting. The programme sponsor board meeting is the meeting that's chaired by the minister, and the 3 governing bodies attended, and also then Sport NI represented. But I think maybe what you're asking me is a representative of Sport NI attends the meeting. It wasn't him. It would be either the chief executive or a senior official.
Was any of the concerns raised by the chair of the STG raised at the sponsor board meeting?
At the sponsor board reading, and again, we've provided the chair with the record of the meetings. Certainly, it would have been raised in terms of an issue that was still ongoing. There were still ongoing discussions. Certainly, it was an issue that still had to be resolved. And I think in saying that, we were mindful that the design work hadn't been completed, and that discussions were still ongoing, and that the design was still ongoing, but clearly it was an issue that had to be resolved.
Yeah. And my last question is that and I only asked, only 3 questions to ask. Hypothetical question. Is it possible to build a stadium and then all of a sudden find out, say, 40,000 stadium, and all of a sudden find out at the very end you only put 20,000 in it?
No. And the reason that wouldn't be possible is because we wouldn't be releasing funding to the contractor or to the governing bodies either to enable them to build it, unless we were satisfied that all due processes had been followed, part of which obviously is getting any approvals that are required, and in this case obviously the advice of an advisory group would have been required as well. So we wouldn't have been releasing funding unless we were satisfied. I wouldn't be recommending it, and I'm sure the accounting officer wouldn't be approving it either.
Just for the record, those are hypothetical numbers that I'm raising. And we talk about the safety certificate being issued, and there's a lot of emphasis put on how late that was issued, etc. You know, what you've clearly heard today, that's nothing unusual. I wonder when the safety certificate was issued for the Windsor Park stand.
There was a safety inspection. I think you're referring to the Sunday night match, obviously, when the international match, and there'd been a safety inspection just prior to that, and a safety certificate had been provided by Belfast City Council, and it was subsequent then to the match, to the event, that we were notified, certainly in the department, of the issue with the West Stand.
Yes, and then was that before the cracks appeared?
The issue arose after the event had taken place.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for allowing me to come back there. I've listened very intently over the period of time here to the answers, and obviously a lot of it has revolved around the safety certificate, and in a normal circumstance that is correct. In Casement Park we have a unique set of circumstances which sit outside of Ravenhill and Windsor Park due to the practicalities and the make-up and the motorway and the housing around it, so it's always going to be more difficult to get to where you want to be, and maybe that's why there's been no response for nearly 2 years to the safety technical group's request for updated exit and emergency plans. Still sits there. One wonders when, after £5.6 million is spent, that will ever come forward, which makes you really wonder, is it a total redesign? And in any other circumstance, safety certificate issued a few weeks beforehand, as Karen has questioned on one, that's normally okay. Well, not sure okay, but certainly Ravenhill didn't get 18,000 either, and you know that it's somewhat less than the 18,000 capacity. It's maybe 16.5, 17 or whatever it would be. Safety certificate's not 18,000 plus. So there are issues when you get that far, but the problem that the committee has is the information which was laid before it is potentially a white elephant, 38,000 sitting with a safety certificate come near the time of 15 or 20, as Oliver might outline there. That's the difficulty that we're facing here, and we haven't really got any answer to what actions were taken, because design people have been on this for some considerable time, and nothing has come forward for the STG to ever get their teeth into to have a look at again. That's a problem.
And just to,
I don't need you to comment on that because that's factual.
Right.
That's where we are at the minute. But in relation to you raise about the, you're free, you welcome people looking for information and raising concerns and whatnot and stuff. But can I ask, a development officer was instructed to go to other members and agencies of the STG in relation to Casement Park and tell them not to respond to a freedom of information request. Why was that done?
Can I say two things? And well, firstly, in response, I really am not in a position to answer that question. I really not, because that will be one of the issues that will be subject to an independent investigation, and I really do not want to prejudice the outcome of that, and that is both to protect the interests of the person raising the concern and others involved as well.
Thank you.
If I just ask, there are various ways in which information filters up to be considered from the STG. One way would be through the process that's set out in the diagram that we were given. Other would be that information might come to the Board of Sport NI, the point that was highlighted earlier. There's another way, and that is through the DCAL departmental board meetings. Now, planning permission was approved until December 13.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, I think the official notice...
If we move beyond December 14 to I'll start here at the beginning of this, February 2014. At the meeting of, and these are off your website, your departmental board meeting minutes, or notes really. It says there that on the 25th of February 14, there was a meeting of the board. Peter May was there as the permanent secretary, you were there as deputy secretary, and Antoinette McKeown was there on that occasion, representing Sport NI. And Aidan Cassidy was representing Macquarie. It says that Cynthia Smith provided an update detailing progress on the regional stadiums. The board noted the progress, discussed key actions which will be taking place in the weeks ahead, and the management of key risks. Cynthia informed the board that DCAL has secured immediate term support and construction expertise and project management through Rory Muskelly from SIB, and the consideration has been given to the resources required as the programme enters the next phase. So at that stage, Rory Muskelly was in post, and there was an update in February 14. That's after the planning application. There's no mention in that minute at all of concerns about emergency exiting, so presumably it wasn't raised at the meeting.
Normally the purpose of those updates are fairly high-level updates.
I'm asking then, was it raised at the meeting?
I would need to check back on my full report, which that would be a summary of. So
Okay,
I would need to see.
Will we get those then and presumably as part of the
Absolutely.
Okay.
And just to say that certainly it was on the programme risk register at certainly in 20 for the programme board. I mean, there are various, as I was explaining to you, that the programme board would have had a risk register as well, and the department as well. But I say that those minutes would be a summary of what was.
Well, yeah, that's why I said it's a note, really,
I would need to see what was actually.
Antoinette McKeown, as head of Sport NI, was there. Did she raise the issue of emergency egress?
Is that the departmental board meeting?
Board meeting, yes, she was there.
Was that held in? Is that because we had a policy? We have a policy of going out round our ALB.
Yes, that's right. It was out that day in Sport NI.
Yes, we meet on a just again to inform the committee. We meet as a board on a monthly basis, and we have been in recent years we've been going out to our ALBs as a means of encouraging engagement, and we would normally go round each of the ALBs to hold our board meetings in their premises.
Sure. It says there on the list of people present, she was there for the meeting. In attendance were several other people who were there for specific items as observers. But she's listed as being present at the meeting.
Yes, can I just say that the normal practice, and I say I can't recall, I would need to refresh my memory of the specific meeting.
That's up to you there.
But the normal practice would be is when we go out to the ALB, and actually the most recent one we were out to we were out at the Ulster Scots Agency, I think, for our last board meeting, and the normal practice is that we ask the Chief Executive of the arm's length body that is hosting our meeting to do a presentation of current issues in the arm's length body, and we invite them in a very open and inclusive way to attend the meeting. Some of them aren't able to stay for the whole meeting.
Let me just ask then, did Antoinette McKeown, when she made her presentation, make any reference to the...
I would not have any recollection of the detail of a meeting held.
Right.
I mean, if there was a significant material issue, I would expect it to be recorded in the minutes.
Okay,
If it had been raised. And in fact, I mean, just to be clear, again, I can't comment on that because it wasn't at the meeting, but certainly in any of the board meetings we have, one of the things that I specifically ask people, and I'm sure a similar process applied here, is if there are significant material issues where risks have changed or issues have arisen, that I ask the question and people answer the question, and that's recorded.
Let me just follow on from that to say that there was reference to stadiums at the departmental board meeting in March 14. Again, Peter May and yourself were obviously there, and you provided an update on the regional stadiums, and we'll get a copy of that in due course. Key risks, how the risks would be managed was discussed. In particular, there was reference there to Casement Park and Windsor Park, but that was, I think, in regard to the EU decision on state aid. There's a particularly interesting one there on the 27th of January this year, where you were in the chair, Cynthia Smith. Rory Miskelly himself was at that meeting.
Yes.
On the 27th of January. Now, that's not a year ago, that's only weeks ago, months ago. Did Rory Miskelly at that meeting raise the issue of emergency egress?
There would have been I would need to refresh my memory again whether that was a meeting at which we would have regular, as you would expect in any departmental board, we would have regular updates of key priority areas. And clearly, as a programme for government commitment, you would expect us to be advising the board of progress in a major significant programme such as this. And that does happen on a regular...
Let me just refresh your memory then on this. What it says is, Rory Miskelly provided an update to the board. He was at the meeting, and he's the one who's really close to the practical outworkings of things, managing the project. So project manager is there, provided an update to the departmental board on progress on the regional stadium programme. This is the meeting that you chaired yourself. The board noted the progress with each stadium and discussed the key actions which will be taking place in the weeks ahead and the management of key risks and challenges. Now, from a meeting that's a matter of weeks ago, not a year ago, at that meeting did Rory Miskelly mention the risk associated with emergency egress?
I just couldn't recall. I couldn't recall that.
But I have to say, Cynthia, this is a matter of major significance, and it is on the 27th of January.
Can I just clarify, is it in the basis, did he present a report? Because normally at regular updates...
Provided an update, it says.
But sorry, just to be clear, I suppose even so that we're not in a situation a year down the line, if we're sitting here a year down the line and somebody were to say to me, okay, at the departmental board, was the issue of the programme discussed? I would have to say, of course, that any major programme will be discussed at the board. Now, the key question for me would be, a year down the line, would be, did somebody raise it as there's a specific escalation of risks? Our whole business, the business of these programmes, and the whole setup of managing programmes is around trying to manage risks and whether they're being managed effectively. So the question is not, in a sense, whether at the board, at the departmental board, somebody has raised an issue or mentioned that health and safety is being dealt with through the programme in this way. It's actually about somebody saying if they feel there's an issue that's not being managed appropriately within the board, within the programme, that needs to be escalated to the board or to the permanent secretary, then that's the question. So it may well be. I suppose it's hard. I can't comment because I wasn't at the meeting, but it's hard to see. No. You could have a scenario where somebody mentions it and says, well, we're currently engaging with the STG on X, Y, or Z. But that might be a whole different conversation from somebody coming up and escalating it and saying it's a major issue.
And in any case, there would have been regular reports provided to the board on a regular basis. Okay. From memory, it would have been, roughly quarterly. We would have got. I
appreciate all of that. I understand how these things work. What I'm asking is, first of all, Dennis, this is not a year ago This is like 4 months ago.
4 months from
Yeah,
now.
so it's
No, it's
within
just-
reasonable memory
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Now, what I'm asking then is, when he provided his update, Rory Scully, and there was then discussion in the meeting, it says, of the key actions. It's not just that he reported on it, there was discussion about key actions which will be taking place in the weeks ahead and the management of key risks and challenges. Presumably, this is one of the key risks. It is a key risk.
Yeah.
It's the key risk.
And clearly it was reported, for example, at the
So it was
programme.
reported.
Sorry, I'm just saying to you that it was reported through the programme board, for example, and I think the meeting was round about the same time. Certainly, the last programme board meeting was, I remember it, but you know, so. Certainly, the reports to the, for example, the programme sponsor board and the programme board, in terms of this is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. That the design work is just the same thing that as I have been discussing this morning. That this is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. That work is ongoing, and that the design is still being developed, and it is an ongoing issue that is being addressed.
I would have thought if somebody was aware of the issues that they've been ongoing for 20 months or whatever the period of time was, that at this stage you would actually say, well, they've been at this for 20 odd months, they still can't get it sorted out. We're now into serious risk. That was obviously then wasn't discussed at that meeting, or you would have remembered
Well, it
it.
certainly wasn't recorded.
Well, I know it wasn't recorded, but was it discussed?
Well, I can just tell you, think from memory, in any updates, Rory would normally have referred to it as an ongoing issue that was being addressed.
But it would be remiss of the rest of the board to allow it to pass as there's an ongoing issue. If we're talking about something that could endanger a £60 million project and potentially bring it crashing to the ground, you actually would then, I would have thought, raise that as a serious, substantial issue. There would be real in-depth discussion, and it would be flagged up with about 10 red flags beside it. Would that not? This seems to have been very casual.
No, absolutely not. And clearly there were regular processes. I mean, you had a sponsor board, just to be very clear. I mean, it's not that we haven't had, structures and meetings and discussions. You have a programme sponsor board.
Worked.
You have a programme board, and you have project boards at every level. You have steering groups. I mean, you have, very significant structures. You have technical people, technical advice. And I can't keep... Well, I will just say again, it was subject, the design work hasn't been completed. This issue is still being addressed. It's still the subject of ongoing discussion. No construction notice will be issued to build it until those discussions have reached a successful and satisfactory conclusion.
It all seems rather strange insofar as the pressure is on within government for capital schemes to be pushed ahead so that money spent within this CSR and not put back to the future when money may not be as available. And that has been a pressure from DFP on departments across the board. Get those projects underway, get them up and moving. I think that's, everybody would accept that is good practice to get money spent if the money's there and there's a project there.
Absolutely.
And yet we're sitting 20 months or whatever, I'm not sure of the exact number, 20, but a significant period of time, money, there was no programme for, no satisfactory resolution to this issue, which has the potential to derail the entire project or make it an entirely different project from what it is now, and all of that. And then it's Rory Muskelly's at a meeting and people don't interrogate him as to, are we any nearer? Nobody asked the question, have you not got an emergency exiting plan back from these people? Nobody, what's going on?
And maybe it's something that we haven't really mentioned this morning, but the other review that we've commissioned is in terms of the Major Projects Authority is conducting a review, a technically focused review, which will address these issues, which will have an independent look at the processes followed in relation to Casement Park. This is a body set up by the Cabinet Office, which will have access to technical expertise. This will be an opportunity to have the processes reviewed and the very questions which are a focus, and rightly so, of this committee addressed independently outside the departmental structures. This is a process which is well established for major projects. It's undertaken by the Major Projects Authority, taking place which is based in the Cabinet Office. we have commissioned it through the Department of Finance and Personnel Central Procurement Division, which is a centre of excellence for these areas, and we are working closely with them. I'll be meeting them next week to start the actual review taking place, and the Minister, I think, has stressed that the findings of those reviews, normally those reviews report to the department, but in this case the Minister has made it very clear that the findings of that report will be made available, publicly available, and I'm very happy to say it will be made available, of course, to the committee.
Let me just say, we have to be out of this room by 1:30, because the Justice Committee is coming here. On that basis, we'll have to defer the presentation from John and breathe a sigh of relief at the back of the room there. We'll have to breathe a sigh of relief. We'll have to defer that, I think, to a future meeting. Dr. Bailey is with us from the Planetarium and the Observatory. Is it both? Just the Observatory, sorry. You have given me an extra responsibility there, just the Observatory. And out of respect to him, I think we need to have an opportunity to hear from him before the 1:30 finishing point. We've got half an hour there. We'll sort of set that aside for that. We've got about 3 minutes. The last name on my list there is Basil McRae. One question.
So, just to Populous, who are Populous?
Populous are the architects, and we've referred earlier to the ICT,
yes,
to the Integrated Consultants team. This was the team appointed in September 2012, and the architects, Mott MacDonald's, were the group appointed, and the architects for that ICT team were Populous.
So, my question is, would the board have any knowledge of a letter from Populous on the 7th of April 2014 entitled Casement Park Emergency Exit System, in which it says, in relation to that, I confirm, this is April 2014, following on from the Chair's timescale, I confirm that the current design proposals comply with the technical requirements of the Guide to Safety at Sports 5th edition in relation to emergency exit for 38,000. Would the board have considered that or had any knowledge, or what is the status of that document?
If you would provide me with a copy of that document, I would be happy to look at it and give you an answer.
I think that's from the bundle of that was given.
Because the point is, just for reference, is that you have said on a number of occasions in answer to people that you couldn't sign off anything until you would get a safety certificate, and the safety certificate may actually come some stage late in the process.
No, just to be clear, it's not that I wouldn't sign off anything I wouldn't sign off anything unless it met safety requirements, and also that the safety technical group had indicated that they were content with the design.
Okay, and so just so in relation to what you just said, the ICT, if we've got that the right way round, we will draw the attention to it, and I would like to know whether that was discussed.
Have a look at the correspondence.
And Populous will be with us hopefully in a few weeks' time.
We have correspondence outstanding to them, yes.
Well, there's correspondence been sent to request them to come. Several other people tried to come in with the extra questions, but we have to finish. I did say 1 o'clock we would stop at. Could I thank you very much indeed for coming. I'm sure there will be further opportunities for discussion with the senior staff and officials in the department. Thank you. And we'll defer the other business. So, thank you. But we need to discuss.
We apologise. I write a letter of apology to Jane.
She has a dinner time shop. Yes.
Sorry, just a point of information, maybe more than anything else. The capacity of Kingspan Stadium is not 16,000, it's actually 18,200. Just for about point of information.
That was responding to the point that was made at Video Village. Does that mean is that what's on their safety certificate?
Agree.
That is what their capacity is.
Yes, but that's different from what their safety certificate is.
18,196 to be
Yeah, I think the point David was making was that the figure on the safety certificate.
There can't be any more. This is come back to your point, Chair. Earlier, there can't be any more people than is on the safety certificate.
Yes.
Because 18,196 is the capacity.
Capacity?
Yeah.
Aye. Not the safety certificate. That's what it was built for.
Yes, that's
You not get them into the match, it would be 16.
You're not allowed to put 18,000 into it even though you built it.
It was going on the safety STG, and they didn't listen to the face.
Well, could we establish that, Chair?
They made
what
the
exact
terraces
capacity is
too-
then? Or what the capacity on the safety certificate is? Because I know that in Croke Park that the capacity is 83,300, but there are never more than 82,500 position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some very similar, I think.
Well, could we find that out? Just out of interest.
Well, I mean,
Can I just ask, just for confirmation, that Cynthia did confirm she'd do this, but I'd like a letter to her that she said that she would provide a chronological list of the times and contents where Sport NI raised the emergency exit issues with the department. So if we could write and ask that formally, and I'd also like, just included in that, just to ask her, did she receive any information from Sports NI which she subsequently conveyed to others?
just to ask Peter there, are there other things that emerged from that?
Chair, just to get agreement on a letter then to the, this is going back to the capacity issue, a letter to Ulster branch of the RFU seeking confirmation of what their safety certificate for capacity of people allowed into a game is, just to clarify that in comparison to the actual physical capacity of the stadium, if members are agreed to that. And then Mr McRae's letter that he's just outlined, if members have any other actions they want to take forward in the brief.
The point I want to appreciate you were constrained by time, Chair, but if Mr McRae is agreeable and accepts an addition to his letter, Cynthia, what I wanted to come back and ask, she said Sport and I was the overseeing body around these issues.
Oh, yes.
I want to know exactly what that means.
Sorry, repeat.
That Sport and I was the overseeing body in terms of when she was presenting to the. I want to know in practice on a day-to-day basis what that means.
Okay.
In terms of the advice that they give the department.
And if we're writing off letters, it might also be useful to get some clarity around the transfer of responsibility from Sport NI to the department. Presumably some sort of report was done to justify that. There must have been some documentation. So could we ask for that as well?
Absolutely.
Because that may identify issues that have repercussions even if the project is moved across to the department. Okay, is that members content with that? Thank you. Brings us now to the delivery plans, savings delivery plans, and the briefing from Armagh Observatory. And could I refer members to the clerk's memo at page 23, a briefing paper from Armagh Observatory at page 3 in the table papers, and the savings delivery plans outlined by the department at page 25. To welcome Professor Mark Bailey, the director of the observatory, here today, and invite him to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much. And thank you for including me this morning and the invitation to speak. Excuse me. Would you like me briefly to go through this long briefing paper, or will I simply take questions at the outset?
If you could make just a few brief remarks, you'll sense that members like to ask questions.
I understand. I understand totally. Okay, so very briefly then, this paper I presented to you is a lengthy document, but the first part of it is the most important in providing an introduction to the observatory as the oldest scientific institution in Northern Ireland and the longest continuously operating institution in the UK and Ireland. There are around about 40 staff and students and visitors. Our main function is to carry out international quality research, which is international in scope, and the other functions that we carry out include the promotion and the preservation of the important heritage of astronomy at Armagh, We maintain the 220-year-old long meteorological record and continue that on a daily basis. And there's a very vibrant programme of science in the community. And the second and third parts of this document that are included here describe the principal research achievements in the last calendar year, including the meteorological record and the research results, the new grants and so forth. And the last section is a rather extensive section with images that includes the observatory's programme of science in the community. So those are for reference rather than reading. I'm very happy to answer questions on them. And in this document, in the first part, I have included a detailed budget of the observatory, income and expenditure, just to indicate the kinds of things that the observatory's resources are spent on, and which is most important, obviously, for the impact of the savings delivery plans that we have to meet this financial year and possibly next as well.
Thank you. Can I just ask, it's an opening question, what impact will the cuts have on your current research programmes?
Well, the very major impacts over the last 4 or 5 years of flat cash funding. That has led to a diminution of the number of students that we can afford to recruit. That in turn has impacted on our outputs scientifically and in terms of the programme of outreach. There is a desire to have an increasing uptake in the economically important STEM subjects, and the observatory contributes to STEM in a number of ways, as indicated in the programme of science in the community, and also to the new STEAM strategy, which includes arts in the STEM agenda. And so the flat cash funding that we have managed in the last 4 or 5 years has had important impacts on those activities. But we're now running with 3 vacant staff posts, and that's putting a very significant load on remaining staff, number one. And also it means that we've really been trimming our budget to the bone this year, and that causes, I'm sure you'll have had this from other people too, but it causes us particular difficulty because cuts of the order of 11%, and we've projected a further 6% coming, impact very disproportionately on small bodies. And we're not unique, obviously, within the department as being a small body. Libraries, individual libraries, are small bodies also. Arts Council funds small bodies, and so on. So I can't claim particular uniqueness there, but it's nevertheless a fact that if you've got an established staff of half a dozen astronomers and postdocs, cuts impact very importantly on the work of those staff, enabling them to travel, present their results to international audiences, and all the rest of it. And at some point, the quantum of cuts becomes a very important issue for a small body.
Thank you. Cathal, please.
Vice Chair, thank you, Professor, and thanks again for your hospitality. You should the committee the last time we visited. I think maybe myself might have been one of the few remaining members here that actually was at the observatory.
And you're very welcome to visit again anytime.
Thank you for that invite again. I just see that within your initial estimates for budgeting, that the draft budget was 177,000, of which 97,000 was made up of no recruitment of essential staff to fill vacancies.
That's right, yeah.
How's that going to affect actual services delivered on the ground?
Well, those 3 staff who are the staff posts that are currently vacant, one is the assistant grounds and meteorological officer. So the state of the grounds is important. It's a frontline facility that is used by approximately 40,000 visitors a year. But more important, in my view, is the lack of backup for the meteorological record. So every day that those readings are taken and the results disseminated every month through press releases and up on our website, And these data are then communicated to the Met Office, and it contributes a very important record, ground truth, if you like, for the impact of global climate change on a particular site in Northern Ireland. And I think that's one of the most valuable records, though we would never have guessed it would be, say, 20 years ago. It's one of the most valuable records that the Observatory has, amongst other scientific records. So that's one issue. The second is the librarian, public relations and education and public outreach officer. And that role has been key to developing the Observatory's programmes of outreach and science in the community. And so that work is in danger of shrinking looking forward. It's very difficult to imagine the same individuals who don't have that full responsibility to carry that forward. And the third issue is the post of the technical support officer, and we have a number of observational facilities, telescopes and so on. And of course, there are of the order of upwards of 50 computers, and all the high-tech computers, high-specification computers, and these need technical support. And at the moment, we just have one computer systems manager. So there's a single-point failure there, and in other aspects of our activity, which we would like to get away from. In times of austerity, times of stress financially, people do work beyond their call of duty, and that's very much appreciated. But it's difficult to imagine doing that long term.
So, in the short term, are those 3 positions going?
They're not disappearing. They're vacant, but we can't advertise them because of lack of funding.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, Mark, and you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Like Cahill, I visited the Observatory on a number of occasions. I want to think with this committee, I'm very impressed with the work that you and your staff carry out there. You said that there's 11% cut, but that the department have put you on notice that there's going to be a further 6% cut.
Yes. They have asked us to prepare or work out how we would accommodate a further 6% cuts. And in the planning, it will be very, very difficult to do that. In the budget that I've attached to those notes, you'll see on page 5, excuse me, you'll see on page 6, sorry, the expenditure. You'll see in the projection, in the projection for the business plan, you'll see a few further cuts have been made, and the bottom line currently is negative. So it's very difficult to do that.
You've mentioned how the 11% cut would impact. How would that further 6%, how and where would it impact?
What, the additional 6%? Well, all we've managed to identify in the short term that we've been able to look at all this is a small figure of around about 10k in outline, which is why the bottom line it represents a deficit.
Okay.
It's very difficult when most of your overheads are staffing, most of the routine, if I can put it that way, running costs are fixed. Yeah. The amount of funding that you have to play with is very limited, and it's very difficult to make these cuts, as everybody else knows, in year.
I know the Observatory has been the feature of Armagh for over 200 years.
Certainly, yeah.
And obviously, you know, you have made a very good attempt to bring the work out into community and engage with the public, especially with school pupils and school children. Can you tell us a bit about the science and community aspect of your work?
Yes, certainly. If you look to the report, that section of this report starts on page 22.
Yeah.
And the points I would highlight there are the programme of school work experience, where you can see on page 23 the number of students that we deal with on a regular basis. We have collaboration with universities, various universities, for example, Trinity, Queen's, and universities in Britain also. We have a Fulks Telescope programme where students who come from schools can use live, as it were, though they've changed their system just this last year, but they still have access to those two telescopes, one in Hawaii and one in Australia, to do what you might call real research, even though they're only with us typically for a week at a time.
Right.
We have therapeutic work experience programme where we take two special needs adults, and other events which are identified throughout that section of the report.
And under the present funding regime, will you be able to continue with the Science in the Community project?
It's my intention that we will, as far as possible, do that, yes. I mean, we have now had this post of librarian and education and public outreach officer vacant for a year, and we're still involved in projects that require us to continue. For example, a new European space awareness programme has just started this March. It doesn't bring a lot of money in, but it nevertheless imposes a discipline of us to disseminate our results to the wider community. There's another project called STEPS, STEM Experts in Primary Schools, which we're involved in, and so forth. So it's not so easy to turn the tap off, and it's not at all our intention to do so. It's nevertheless important to note that we need a member of staff who's got the abilities, the creative abilities perhaps, to disseminate to the general public as well as to schools and others the results of the work of the more senior staff.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Basil?
Mark, do we really need the planetarium and the observatory?
Do we really need it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit small, isn't it?
Well, I'll talk about the observatory, if I may, but the planetarium too, obviously.
Well, it's just for the funding. It's all wrapped in the money.
They're wrapped in together, yes.
So just why would we bother?
Well, why? That's a very good question. It's an important question to be answered. And here, the first point I suppose I'd make is that the observatory is now celebrating its 225th anniversary. It's a very important institution for the city of Armagh and environs, and for Northern Ireland generally through the outreach and the work we do scientifically. So that's one point. And the other point to keep in mind is that the observatory operates on an international stage. And one of those international aspects is our collaboration with other UK astronomers on the Southern African Large Telescope.
I was going to say, I see there's a cut coming in salt.
Sorry?
I see you're forecasting a cut in
because
salt,
it's one of those areas that we've been unable to keep going, at least for this financial year. And there was a...
That means, just to be clear, does that mean if you don't pay the £14,000 or whatever it is, you don't get to access to that South African telescope?
Well, it means that might be reduced. That's an element that we're not wishing to lose. We have commitments to the programme, but that's one of the areas that we want to maintain, because the way the observatory operates is by collaboration with other partners. We have collaboration with the Bulgarians, which gives us access to their 2-metre class telescope. We have collaborations in the same way with South Africa. And when the SALT project was being initiated, there was a man called Kotso Makili, who was president of the South African National Research Foundation. And the point that he made was, why would South Africa, all those years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago nearly, put so much effort into science, into astronomy in particular? And his argument was not to offer flagship sciences such as physics and astronomy would be to take a negative view of our future, chained forever to the treadmill of feeding and clothing ourselves. So his attitude, and I suppose the one that I would support, is that small countries, small budget countries, if I can put South Africa into that category, would play to their strengths. And astronomy in Armagh is one of the strengths of Northern Ireland. It's known throughout the world. It attracts people, postdocs and students from all over the world, and those individuals go back to their country and countries and establish ongoing links. And so in this way, the bang for your buck, if I put it crudely, is enhanced, and the observatory's international profile is known throughout the world.
So, just the final question, and I mean it in the most sympathetic way. I too have been down, as you know, to have had a look, and I'm wildly enthusiastic about space. But if I said to you, you may have an international reputation, and you will obviously have a good reputation in Armagh. It's part of the infrastructure. But I'm not sure that in the wider Northern Ireland, you've really managed to convince people that you are, premier in your league. I mean, do you accept that?
I don't know whether how hard that is to do. Sometimes when you are identifying the most important cultural assets of the community, you don't really recognise those that are in your own backyard. So it may well be the case that we're better known abroad than in Northern Ireland. And it's very difficult to overcome that hump. We have, as you see, in excess of several hundred media citations to our work every year.
Yes.
We have a very active and rich website. We're issuing press releases on a regular basis. It's very hard to understand quite why the general public in Northern Ireland perhaps don't appreciate the work that we do.
Okay. My last question just on that, just because I can't quite find the figures here. I know that you get a lot of school, which is for the general environment, but what added value is there in terms of either external tourists or, how do we generate revenue coming out of the complex? Can we do that?
Well, the main revenue funding source for the complex, as you put it, is the planetarium.
Yes.
And there they take of the order of 40,000 visitors a year who are charged to see the star shows, and they are well known on the tourist route for sure. As far as the observatory is concerned, we take a fraction of that number. On guided tours, we take groups coming of both tourists and special niche visitors, for example, and that's one element of our programme of science in the community. But we couldn't possibly charge those visitors what you would call an economic fee, because it would be disproportionate. The way the observatory attracts external income, and there's two main sources. One is external research grants, and they are the main source of the observatory's recurrent income, which amounts to of the order of £200,000 or £300,000 a year. The second, which is not noted in the accounts, is the income in kind. So we have access through UK government subscriptions to all the European facilities, the space facilities, and our use of those is provided at no cost to Northern Ireland. So there is an income of the order of £1 million a year through use of the largest telescopes in the world. So those are two revenue streams for the observatory, and there are potentially others, but most of them are relatively small, because the main function is the astronomical research. I can give you a particular recent example, and that's noted in this report also, of the new grants. So if you were to look at that section of the report where the grants are identified, there you'll see that...
is this page 7 we're on?
No, it's a page... it's in the second part. If you look at page 14... Yeah, I identify several new grants. Page 14.
Yes, this is
and the one I
page
would...
14 or page 17.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I apologise.
No, it's-
Under that section, the one I would draw most attention to is the DKIST, the Solar Telescope project. And there the department helped the observatory to join that project, to help lead the project with Queen's, and that has now turned into a £4 million project. And the purpose of it is to get, if you like, access to UK astronomers to that large telescope in Hawaii to observe the sun, but also to get local industry to build the cameras for that telescope, which has massive spin-off into medical imaging and other technologies. So there the trick is, if I can put it that way, is to help British UK companies to develop new technology cameras, which will then spin off into industry. And that's a particularly interesting example of how relatively small amounts of Northern Ireland government research can lead to some substantial inward investment into Northern Ireland while still supporting the research that we do.
Thank you. William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for your patience today and bearing with us in your presentation. How many observatories are there in Northern Ireland?
I think we're the only one of any substantial size. Queen's used to have an observatory, might still have, and then the amateurs, a number of them, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic, would have modest observatories, as do the universities.
So given that you are our only observatory at any standing and certainly an international status,
yes,
this is hugely important work in Northern Ireland internally, but also reputationally for Northern Ireland as a UK Centre of Excellence in terms of academic visitors. And you make mention of that in your report, and you mentioned in your presentation Queen's, people coming from Queen's and Trinity College Dublin. Do you charge for that? For academic, temporary academic visitors who come to the observatory?
No, not usually. Normally, such visitors would come on research grants. So either they're coming under a visitor's grant that we have obtained, or we attract them because there's joint work to be done. And it's usually it would normally be a kind of a quid pro quo. So if we travel to their institute, they might provide some funding for us. And conversely, it depends on the specific instance. There are a few different examples highlighted.
Given you have these academic visitors, I mean, has there been any thought given by your board to make an approach to Dell? Although, having listened to the Dell Minister on TV last night, I know that he doesn't have a huge budget either, but I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to, because you're the only...
Yes, in the part, you see, the observatory in the old days, if I put it that way, used to be part of the higher education branch, used to be funded through higher education in Northern Ireland, but the observatory and the planetarium are funded now by DCAL, and therefore Dell has always indicated it has no remit to fund Armagh. Therefore, why would it do so? I suppose that's the general point. We nevertheless do contribute to DEM-led strategies, such as STEM and so on. And if we can find sources of funding from other departments, then we would certainly go for it.
I just think that's something which you might look at. I mean, I get the point. I mean, I'm involved in the Scout Association. We take kids every year to the planetarium because the kids would be interested in that.
Yeah.
To be honest, they're not going to be interested in going. And I was at the visit with the committee to your facility as well. They're not going to be, unless they're particularly specifically interested in.
Well, they do come to the observatory, but we don't usually charge them.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that I know
it's a small number. It's a much smaller number than in the planetarium because
most don't go through for good or ill. That's
absolutely
the reality.
Yeah.
I think it might be an idea for your board to look at that. And thank you for your presentation. And could I ask you as well, on a personal note, if you would pass on my regards to Gregory Dunstan when you next see him?
Will do. Well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rosie McCormick.
Yeah, my good Caroline, thanks
for
the presentation and for your patience. Can I just ask you about your funding? And you have told me funding?
Yes, we had a programme called European Universe Awareness, which finished in March this year, in March 2014, I should say. And we have a new programme coming out of that called EU Space Awareness, which is we're a much smaller cog in that programme than we were in the previous one. We've been involved in Europlanet, which has, I think, been restarted, and I don't know, as I speak to you, exactly our status in that. And we're now the administrating organisation for the EU Cost Action, which is noted there amongst the new grants, and that's going to finish at the end of this calendar year. So we do apply for European grants, and from time to time we get big ones, from time to time we get a number of small ones. And the EU Space Awareness and EU Cost is among the relatively smaller ones.
Are they all standalone grants, or do they depend on match funding?
They would be standalone grants, but always with EU funding. The institution, although it's given some notional overhead, has to provide additional resource. For example, in the case of Universe Awareness, which was an FP7 project, if you buy a piece of equipment, you can't charge the VAT to the funder. That's the European rules. So that kind of money has to come. The main impact of the external funding is that you usually get a member of staff, and you usually manage to do another element of research, and you develop further international collaborations, which then run forward into the future in the way that you would hope for, as an academic organisation.
Yeah. I was reading about your climate recording records.
Yes.
It's very interesting. Would that be under threat with budget cuts?
Well, I would hope not. I think that the Met record, as I said, is one of the most interesting and long-term records because it provides ground truth as to how a particular site in Northern Ireland is responding to observed climate change. And in Armagh, we have particular interest in helping to understand the causes of that because of our involvement in solar physics and the knowledge that the sun is a variable star and all the rest of it.
Okay, but so you'd feel that regardless of what might happen, that would still be maintained?
Well, I hope it will be, yes. I mean, while I'm director, then I would like to support it. Of course, new brooms come in and they might say, well, no, our real interest is over there. And then it would be, I think it would be a tragedy if that particular record was lost.
Particularly considering how long it's been running.
Yes, and it's important that it should be run continuously and with the data recorded in the same manual way, if I can put it that way, although we would like to have an automatic system to get the calibration across. So that's one of the strengths of Armagh, and also the fact that it's a small city, and so the heat island effect is much smaller than in other long-term records that one could mention.
Okay. Thanks very much.
I think it would be true to say, for hope not out of order in saying this, people would recognise across the committee that the observatory is part of, use the phrase that's often used to these things, part of the cultural wealth of Northern Ireland. It's unique, and it does put us on the stage internationally, as you've said there rightly, and therefore government, I think, has a particular responsibility in terms of sustaining and supporting such an institution at an appropriate level, that it's not run into the ground because of lack of finance. There are other projects that are funded that have short lifespan, come and go, and they're here for a day and gone. This is something that if you lose it, you've lost it forever, probably.
That's a real risk. Yeah.
I think that is, if members, we'll talk about after you finish, but we'll talk about what we do now. But could I just say that, and then thank you for your paper presentation and the verbal presentation, and apologise for the delay.
Not at all. I thank you very much for the invitation and for letting me stay and talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going. What do your records tell you about climate change? Is
Look,
climate
Basil, behave yourself. Don't start a row.
Carry on.
But enough rows.
I'll speak to you
Behave
later.
yourself. No, it goes against the grain.
I'll give you a shout, actually.
Please do. Thank you.
Come on.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Are there two things then, just as regards then the planetarium, or observatory, not planetarium, observatory, do I want to take any particular action in terms of writing to the department to bring support behind it because of its unique position? I think so. Members agreeable to that? Okay. Highlight that. Sorry, go back to this.
Agreement to defer.
We're I think agreed more or less formally we'll agree to defer the other
all
item.
other
I think.
business.
Yeah.
Is that, we're going to defer, but just to check the papers, is that the issue about the financing?
Yes.
So that's going to come.
That's come back. That's why Joanna headed on, because a lot of it was around the room.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. There's correspondence then at page 33 regarding only building overheads and so on. There's nothing in there that is that urgent that it needs to be dealt with particularly today. We defer them to next week. I think. Okay.
Members
11, sorry.
Page 8. Last page, very last page.
No, it's page 8, correct. Next meeting, Tuesday the 2nd.
Chair, can I just raise one thing, just on the long discussion we had, just one point I want to, on the planning permission that was got for the stadium, could we find all the details in that, the background, who was consulted, and the drawings, etc. I think it's important we establish what the planning permission was at that stage, exact detail of what was approved. Please. Thank you.
Next meeting then, Tuesday the 2nd of June, room 21. At this meeting, the decal will provide an update on June monitoring. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.